Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up 3 hours of real-life Reddit stories to keep you company, whether you're winding down for the night or just need something playing in the background. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today, where I get more progress done on my base and fight the Wither for the very first time. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so whenever you need something to relax or fall asleep to, feel free to come back to the channel. But anyways, let's get into the video. This first story is about a hotel worker dealing with pure chaos after a massive concert crowd spilled into their property. So, over the weekend, there was this huge concert at the stadium right next to my hotel. The expected attendance was somewhere around 50,000 people, and let me just say, when you bring that many people into one spot, you're guaranteed some kind of madness. And sure enough, the chaos came right along with them. I was working the front desk that night, right after the concert ended. The whole area was swarmed with people pouring out of the stadium, heading toward the bars, the restaurants, and anything else nearby. It felt like the entire property suddenly turned into a festival ground, and within half an hour of the concert letting out, the craziness started rolling in. The first big thing I noticed was a commotion outside. I pulled the curtain and peeked out the window, and what do I see? A tow truck already had a car lifted up in the air. The tow driver and the car's owner were out front, screaming at each other. Apparently, this guy thought he was being clever. Instead of paying for the stadium parking, he just slipped into the spot that's specifically reserved for our general manager. What he didn't count on was the fact that our security guards don't play games when it comes to that spot. They called in the tow right away. As the car is getting taken away, a crowd gathers, and people start egging both men on. It escalated fast. The car's owner shoves the tow driver, and because there was already extra police presence in the area for the concert, the cops were there in less than 30 seconds. Instead of calming down, this guy doubles down. Not only does he push the tow driver, he actually ends up shoving one of the officers too. And that was it for him. They arrested him right there on the spot. And the kicker? His car still got towed. He lost the argument, got arrested, and still had to deal with paying to get his car back. A little later, another situation popped up. A couple strolled into the lobby on scooters, literally rode them right into the middle of the lobby, and then parked them like it was their personal garage. They sat down and told me they were just going to hang out until the crowd died down outside. So I asked the usual question, "Are you guests here?" I already knew they weren't, but I needed them to say it. Sure enough, they admitted no. So I told them, "You can't sit here. You need to head out." But they refused. They just stayed sitting there like I was the unreasonable one. I asked again, and they refused again. And then somehow, they started flipping the situation, trying to act like I was the bad guy for making them leave. At that point, I called security and let them know what was going on. And since we had police all over the property, I wasn't about to deal with their nonsense. Eventually, the couple left without anything crazy happening, but before they went, the guy actually threatened to pee on the lobby floor. I still can't believe he said that with a straight face. Honestly, a part of me almost wished he would have done it, because making that phone call to the general manager about why the police had to arrest somebody for urinating in the lobby would have been one for the books. Then came one of the strangest interactions of the night. A drunk guy stumbles in, walks right up to the desk like he owns the place, snaps his fingers at me, and says, "Call me an Uber." Just like that, no greeting, no question, just a demand. I told him I couldn't do that. He looked confused and asked why. And then, out of nowhere, he asked if it's because he's black. I told him no. It's because the hotel doesn't even have a cell phone. I can't call rides for guests, let alone random drunk people off the street. He stood there staring at me for a second, kind of trying to process it. Then, out of nowhere, he says, "Well, I guess that makes me the stupid one, huh? Well played, sir." And then he just walked out. I stood there for a minute thinking, what just happened? And then came the final straw of the night. A drunk woman came stumbling in. She looked a lot like Honey Boo Boo before all the plastic surgery. She was wearing a crop top and a pleated mini skirt. Clearly, several drinks past her limit. She came right into the lobby shouting, "I'm looking for a man to buy me wings." Nobody responded. Nobody volunteered. But she wasn't giving up. She upped the ante by saying she'd offer to start booty popping in exchange for wings. At that point, I waved security over because the lobby isn't a nightclub and it definitely isn't a wing joint. They escorted her out, but as I stood there watching her stumble off, the only thing running through my head was, "Ma'am, drunk and stupid is no way to go through life." By the time my shift finally ended, I don't think I've ever been happier to clock out. It felt like the longest, most bizarre night I've had in a long time. That's where this story ends. The mix of 50,000 concert goers and late night drinking is pretty much a recipe for this kind of madness. What's wild is how it all spiraled in such different ways. Cars getting towed, people treating the lobby like a bus stop, and random folks asking for wings or Ubers. Each one on its own would be a funny story, but stacked together in one shift? That's brutal. The hotel worker must have been counting down the minutes until freedom. This next story is about someone recovering from surgery who accidentally discovered a very unusual bathroom trick right as their husband walked in at the worst possible moment. Recovery after surgery is one of those things you think you're prepared for until it blindsides you in the most ridiculous ways. I'd had a hysterectomy a week earlier, and every single normal body function felt like it had turned against me. Sneezing wasn't just uncomfortable. It felt like knives stabbing me from the inside. Coughing felt like a crime. But the biggest challenge? Using the bathroom. Something so basic, something you never think about, had suddenly turned into an uphill battle. Late one night, while scrolling through my phone in desperation, I started looking up tricks for making things easier. I stumbled across this random comment where someone swore by mooing like a cow. According to them, it relaxes your pelvic floor. I laughed out loud. The mental image alone was absurd. No way, I thought. That cannot be real. But tucked in the back of my mind, I filed it under. So ridiculous, it might actually work. The next morning, I found myself sitting on the toilet, sweating, practically in tears, bargaining with the universe to just let things happen. Nothing was working. I was ready to give up. And then, almost out of frustration, I thought, fine, let's test this ridiculous internet cow theory. I took a breath, dropped my voice low, and let out a full-bodied, from the chest, moo. And I swear it worked instantly. My body just relaxed. It was like some weird switch flipped. In that moment, I actually laughed at how absurd it was. All it took was mooing like a farm animal. But here's where the real disaster came in. Mid-moo, my husband happened to be walking past the bathroom. Normally, we don't even lock the door. And of course, this was the one moment he decided to open it. We made eye contact. Me sitting there, frozen in mid-moo. Him standing in the doorway, blinking like he'd just walked into another dimension. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then the absurdity of it all hit me, and I completely lost it. I started laughing. Big, unstoppable, belly-shaking laughter. Except when you've just had abdominal surgery, laughing feels like being torn apart from the inside. So now I was clutching my stomach, crying, half laughing, half mooing, trying to breathe through the pain while still sitting on the toilet. My husband looked horrified, like he couldn't decide if he should rush to comfort me, call 911, or slowly back away, and pretend the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. The poor guy stood frozen for a good 5 seconds, before quietly backing out of the bathroom. I don't think either of us will ever forget the image burned into our minds that day. Me, post-surgery, mooing through tears and laughter, while he stood in the doorway wondering if he'd just lost his grip on reality. So yes, I did in fact learn that mooing on the toilet works. But I also permanently guaranteed that every time my husband looks at me sideways, he's probably hearing phantom cow sounds in his head. That's where the story ends. What's funny here is how something that started as pure desperation turned into a full comedy skit. The timing of the husband walking in could not have been worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. The image of holding back laughter while recovering from surgery is painful and hilarious all at once. And honestly, it's impossible not to picture the husband trying to process what he just saw. This next story is about someone who fought back after Spotify tried to deny them a refund that was clearly promised in their own terms. This morning I woke up, checked my phone, and saw a charge from Spotify Premium. That sinking feeling hit immediately. I had been meaning to cancel before the renewal date, but life got busy, and I forgot. My subscription rolled over, and my card got billed. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was still money I didn't want to waste, especially on a service I wasn't using much anymore. My first instinct was to check Spotify's refund policy. I've been burned before by companies that make it sound like refunds are impossible once the charge has gone through. But Spotify's website said otherwise. According to what I read, they had a 14-day withdrawal, right? As long as I canceled quickly, I'd qualify. Feeling a little more confident, I canceled my premium plan right away, literally within minutes of the renewal hitting. And then I opened up their live chat support to request my refund. That's where things started to go sideways. I got connected with a support agent named Christina. She was polite at first, asking the usual scripted questions about my account and my issue. I explained that my plan had just renewed, that I had already canceled, and that I was requesting a refund under the 14-day withdrawal policy. I figured she'd process it and I'd be done in 5 minutes. Instead, she told me flat out that I wasn't eligible. Her explanation was that the 14-day refund period only applied to brand new subscriptions. According to her, if you had already been a member for months, renewals didn't qualify. She even went so far as to say, "I understand this is frustrating, but our policy is clear." To make her point, she pasted me a link to their own refund page and told me to read it for myself. At that point, I could have let it go. A lot of people probably would. But the thing was, I had already read that policy before opening the chat. I knew she was wrong, or at least that she was interpreting it in a way that didn't line up with the bigger picture. So instead of backing down, I decided to dig deeper. I opened up their full terms of use, the long legal document that most people scroll past without reading. It took some searching, but in section 3, under withdrawal right, I found the exact language I needed. It said that users had 14 days after any purchase to withdraw for any reason. It didn't say only the first purchase. It didn't carve out exceptions for renewals. It just said any purchase. That meant my monthly renewal counted. It was, legally speaking, a new purchase. Armed with that, I went back into the chat and quoted the section word for word. I told Christina, "Actually, your terms of use say otherwise. Section 3, under withdrawal right, gives me 14 days to withdraw after any purchase. That includes renewals." She paused, then replied that she'd need to check backstage, which I guess is Spotify's way of saying she needed to escalate. A few minutes later, she came back with the same denial. She said her team confirmed that renewals didn't qualify. It was obvious she was working off a script, and her managers were doubling down on it. That's when I decided to push harder. I sent her this message. "Since this dispute is specifically about the legal interpretation of the withdrawal right in your terms of use, could you please provide the contact information for Spotify's legal department or the appropriate office for handling formal contractual disputes?" The change was instant. Suddenly, Christina's entire tone shifted. She stopped parroting the script and said she'd see what she could do. 5 minutes later, she came back with a totally different answer. "I've managed to ask some support with our backstage team, and we can go ahead and process a refund for you." Just like that, the refund was approved. It couldn't have been more obvious that they knew I was right the whole time, but they were hoping I'd give up when faced with pushback. Their system counts on customers not pressing the issue, not reading the fine print, and not holding them to their own words. The second I made it clear I was prepared to escalate it as a legal matter, they folded like a cheap suit. And the best part? They couldn't even hide it. Christina went from denying me 3 times in a row to suddenly being able to find a solution. Nothing had changed except me insisting on my rights. Walking away from that chat, I felt both satisfied and annoyed. Satisfied because I got my refund, but annoyed because I knew most people in the same position wouldn't. The only reason I succeeded was because I read the actual terms of use and held my ground. It made me realize how many times people must have been told no and just accepted it. So here's the thing. If you ever find yourself in that position, don't just take their word for it. Read the policy, read the terms, and know what you're entitled to. Companies like Spotify bank on the fact that most people won't bother, but if you do, you'll often find they don't have a leg to stand on. That's where the story ends. What gets me about this one is how fast the tone shifted once legal was mentioned. It really shows how much these companies rely on people just accepting the first no. The storyteller didn't even argue aggressively, just pointed to the exact terms, and suddenly the whole thing flipped. It's one of those rare cases where persistence actually worked exactly the way it should. This next story is about new homeowners who had to deal with neighbors pushing their frustrations about the previous owners onto them. When I think back about buying that house, It feels like a lifetime ago. It was about 10 years back, and I still remember the excitement of finally finding a place that checked every box I needed. The inside of the house was perfect. The rooms felt open. The light came in just right through the windows, and I could instantly imagine myself settling in. It wasn't one of those houses where you have to talk yourself into liking it. This one felt like it was meant for me. The outside, though, was another story. Specifically, the backyard. At first glance, it looked like something you'd see in one of those landscaping magazines. Lots of big design choices, lots of effort clearly put into it. But the problem was, it was just too much. Way too much. Instead of a nice yard with some grass where you could throw a football or relax with a drink in the evening, I was staring at what felt like an artificial nature reserve. The centerpiece was this massive water feature. Imagine a giant bed of river rocks, snaking across the entire backyard, and running through it was a 50-foot-long stream. The stream wound its way all the way down to a large pond, complete with one of those fountains that shot water into the air. I know for some people that kind of thing would be impressive, maybe even peaceful. But for me, it felt like someone had taken what could have been a simple, enjoyable yard and just completely overcomplicated it. I could tell right away that the previous owners must have dropped a small fortune on all of it. The stonework, the pumps, the landscaping. It wasn't cheap, and I'm sure they were proud of it. But I knew as soon as I saw it that I'd be ripping it all out. My plan, honestly, was to take care of it during the very first year. I thought, okay, I'll move in, get settled inside, and then reclaim my backyard by getting rid of this oversized water park. But here's the thing about moving into a new neighborhood. People come out of the woodwork to introduce themselves. And in my case, the first two to do it were the neighbors who lived behind me. At first I thought it was just a friendly hello. You know, the typical welcome to the neighborhood type of thing. Instead, the entire conversation turned into them airing out their frustrations about the very backyard I had just inherited. Both neighbors went on for 10 minutes straight about how much they hated that water feature. They told me about how annoying it was, how much they disliked the previous owners, and then even started commenting on other details about the property. The funny part is, some of those things they didn't like were things I actually thought were nice, but they didn't care. They just kept going, like I was supposed to nod along and agree with every word. At first I did nod along. I thought they were just venting, and maybe it was part of the neighborhood gossip, but the longer it went on, the more it felt like they were trying to make their problems into my problems. I had just moved in, and instead of getting to settle into my new home, I was being handed the baggage of people I'd never even met, the former owners. After a while, I got annoyed. I cut it short by saying something like, "Yeah, I've got a lot to do back here," and left it at that. That moment actually changed my entire approach. Originally, I had been set on ripping out the backyard right away. But after that conversation, I thought, you know what? I can live with it for a while. Part of it was me not wanting to jump into such a big project right away. And part of it was probably a little bit of stubbornness. The neighbors had basically told me what they wanted, and I didn't feel like giving them the satisfaction of acting like their complaints controlled what I did. So the backyard stayed exactly the way it was. Year after year, the stream kept running, the fountain kept splashing, and the neighbors had to look at it every time they glanced over the fence. And you know what? I adjusted. It wasn't my favorite setup, but it wasn't the end of the world either. It became background noise, something I barely noticed after a while. It stayed that way for years. I focused on other parts of the house, fixed what I wanted to inside, and lived with the yard. Then, eventually, I decided it was time. After years of putting it off, I finally got around to tackling the backyard project. It took a lot of work, and honestly, tearing everything out wasn't easy. The rocks alone seemed endless, and getting rid of the pond and fountain took time and effort. But piece by piece, I cleared it all away until the space finally looked like the backyard I had always pictured when I first moved in. Here's the funny part. After all those years of hearing the neighbors complain about how much they hated the water feature, not a single one of them said anything once it was gone. No thanks, no finally, not even a quick comment in passing. They made it sound like it was the worst thing in the world when I moved in, but when I actually fixed the problem, they didn't acknowledge it at all. Looking back, it makes me think their frustration was less about the water feature itself and more about just not liking the people who came before me. Once they got to unload that frustration on me, it was out of their system, and the actual backyard didn't matter anymore. That's where the story ends. What gets me about this story is how people can complain nonstop, but then have nothing to say once the thing they griped about is actually gone. It's almost like they just wanted something to project their feelings onto. The silence at the end says more than all the complaints ever did. Sometimes the funniest part of a situation is what doesn't get said. This next story is about a bride-to-be dealing with a wedding guest who clearly has a crush on her fiancé and tries pushing boundaries in petty ways. My wedding is coming up soon, and I never thought I'd be writing about something this ridiculous, but here we are. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm marrying my fiancé, who is also in his early 30s. He's one of those rare, genuinely amazing people. Brilliant, funny, tall, good-looking, and kind to his core. He's also incredibly loyal and socially awkward, the kind of person who misses hints that are obvious to everyone else. It's part of what I love about him, but it also leads to some strange situations. Since we moved across the country a couple of years ago, his coworkers have become his closest group of friends. They're a small, tight-knit bunch who go out for after-office drinks once a month. I've tagged along a few times, and they're a nice group overall, except for one woman. Let's call her Daisy. Daisy is in her late 30s, and it is painfully clear that she has a huge crush on my fiancé. I'll be honest, I don't even blame her. My fiancé is great, but the way she behaves around him is like watching a teenager with a crush. She twirls her hair, laughs a little too hard at his jokes, and touches his arm every chance she gets. One time, I even saw her hand land on his knee, and I could practically feel myself glaring across the table. When I mentioned it to him later, he looked surprised. He hadn't noticed, and once it clicked, his reaction was pretty much disgust. He said, "Gross," and promised to sit away from her at future gatherings. That's the kind of guy he is. He genuinely doesn't encourage it. He's not cheating, not hiding anything, not seeking attention. He doesn't even follow random women online. He spends every day with me, bakes me cookies when I'm sad, brushes my hair, and treats me like I'm his whole world. Daisy doesn't stand a chance. Still, she hasn't exactly backed down. And now that our wedding is just days away, she's managed to stir up even more nonsense. We're keeping the wedding small, about 35 people. Some of our guests are gluten intolerant, including Daisy, so instead of cake for them, we're ordering gluten-free cupcakes from a boutique bakery that's known for being completely safe. One of our guests has celiac disease, so we needed a place that could guarantee no cross-contamination. This bakery only has 2 flavors, chocolate and caramel. When we asked everyone's preference, every single person chose chocolate, except Daisy. She specifically requested caramel, and even mentioned she doesn't like chocolate. I was about to place the order when I got a message that made my jaw drop. Daisy had been talking about wearing white to our wedding. Not only that, but she planned to bring a guest who would wear beige. I told my fiancé, and he was furious. He messaged her right away and shut it down. He told her directly, no white, no ivory, no cream, no light gray, no pastels, nothing that could even be mistaken for bridal colors. He said she could wear literally anything else, even flip-flops if she wanted, but she was not going to break the one clear rule. Her excuse? She said it was just a white blouse and that she'd wear peach pants with it. Then she pouted about how her friend only looks good in light beige. My fiancé didn't budge. He told her point blank that she was being rude for even considering it. She sulked, but that was the end of the conversation. We considered uninviting her altogether, but I didn't want to create drama in the group. Instead, we decided to have our bases covered. The gate guard will stop her if she shows up in white, and my friends even volunteered to dump red wine on her if she dares walk past in the wrong color. Honestly, if she tried it, I'd laugh. She'd only embarrass herself. After all that drama, I sat back down to finish the cupcake order. I double-checked the list, filled in the flavors, and when I got to Daisy's name, something happened. Let's just say I accidentally forgot to order the one caramel cupcake she asked for. Every single gluten-free guest will get a safe and delicious chocolate cupcake. Daisy? Well, oops. She'll have to eat chocolate or nothing at all. Petty? Absolutely. But after hearing about her trying to wear white to my wedding and dragging a friend along in beige, I can't even feel guilty. That story ends there. This feels like one of those subtle wins that's almost more satisfying than a big confrontation. It's hilarious how Daisy thought she could push boundaries, only to end up with no caramel cupcake and no chance at stealing attention. Sometimes the smallest acts of petty revenge are the sweetest. This next story is about a high school swimmer who gets loudly teased about a supposed hickey on the pool deck right before practice. High school never felt like a place built for me. I wasn't invisible, but I definitely wasn't part of the orbit where attention turned into protection. I swam varsity, which meant my name showed up on rosters and meet programs, but socially, I hovered on the fringe. The so-called popular kids made sport out of needling me. Mean girl is the best shorthand for it. They'd grab the ugliest photos from team albums for hallway collages, snicker when I walked by, whisper jokes that were meant to be heard. It wasn't constant catastrophe, just steady erosion. Little cuts that added up. Practice days followed a ritual. I'd step from the locker room onto the deck, and the world would immediately smell like chlorine and echo like a tiled cathedral. The ceiling lights reflected in the lane lines, the blocks stood at attention, and the water hummed with a low, familiar slap as people pushed off the walls. There's a rhythm to a pool. Whistles, chatter, the squeak of wet feet, the clatter of kickboards. That afternoon, I was one of the last to reach the lanes. My cap tugged tight against my hair, goggles looped loosely around my neck, shoulders prickling with the air-conditioned chill that lives above the water. I took a few steps along the deck when a voice cut across everything. One of the boys who orbited the mean girl cluster looked right at me, raised his eyebrows big enough for an audience, and yelled, "Hey, what did you get up to last night? Is that a hickey on your chest?" Laughter scattered around the lanes like coins thrown into a fountain. He grinned wide, proud of himself for finding a new angle. The mark he'd noticed sat just above my right breast. It's a small scar, a pale half moon that softens with time but never really disappears. It's from my Metaport. I had childhood cancer, and that port made the treatments possible. Years earlier, it felt like a stamp I wanted to hide under necklines and strategic towels. That day, in that flash, it felt like something else entirely. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even adjust my goggles. I looked at him with a flat face and said, "Actually, that's the scar from my Metaport from when I had cancer. No heat, no tremor. Just the truth placed gently on the water like a lane rope." Silence fell so fast the whole deck seemed to contract. His grin drained away, leaving his face open and uncertain the way a kid looks when a teacher calls his name and he doesn't have the answer. The chuckles dissolved mid-breath. Mouths hung open. My two closest friends, who knew the story already, glanced at each other and then at me, both of them glowing like someone had cracked a window and fresh air blew in. I passed him, stepped to my lane, slipped the goggles down, and dove. The water took me like it always does, cool on the shoulders, weightless on the mind. Under the surface, everything turns quiet except the rattle of bubbles and the thump of your own kick. With each length, I felt the heat leave my cheeks. I counted strokes, flipped at the wall, and let the rhythm do what it always does, pull me back to myself. No one said anything until the coach came out and blew the first whistle. Even then, orders were clipped and practical, and the set started without commentary. Between repeats, I caught the boy looking at me once, eyes lowered, the bravado drained. He didn't say a word. It's been years since that afternoon, but the moment still sits clear in my memory. Part of it is the suddenness, the way a joke swung and missed so hard the whole room lost its balance. Part of it is what the scar became for me in that second. For a long time, I treated that small crescent like a flaw to be disguised. It carried hard days and hospital smells, and a kind of quiet I didn't choose. On a pool deck where people had decided I was an easy target, it turned into something else. Proof. Proof that I had walked through something difficult and kept moving. Proof that my body remembered a battle even when other people only saw surface. The story didn't end with that silence. High school has a way of keeping people in fixed shapes, but we're not actually statues. After that afternoon, the boy approached me differently. Tentative first, then steady. He offered me a lead on my first summer job, and when I was stood up for a date once, he swung by with a group and folded me into their movie night so I wouldn't sit alone. Over time, he became a friend. From what I've seen since, he grew into a thoughtful adult, a good husband, and a caring dad. We lost touch like people do, but that snapshot of who he became sits next to the memory of what he did on the deck. Both can be true at once. Looking back, the joy I get from the moment isn't about winning or humiliation. It's about a balance being quietly restored. Being mean for sport is easy. It doesn't ask anything of you except a crowd. Telling the truth is harder because it risks something real. On that day, the truth landed and everything cheap had to step aside. There are small details I still remember. The way the tiles felt cold under bare feet, the thin scratch of the cap seam against my scalp, the particular brightness of that hush after I spoke, the relief of slipping into the lane and letting the water carry the last of the sting away, the way my friends' faces said, without saying anything, that I wasn't alone. High school doesn't last, but some scenes survive it. This is one of mine. It reminds me that a single plain sentence can be an answer, a boundary, and a door opening all at once. That's where the story ends. What lands here is the precision of the response. No anger, no performance, just a fact that flipped the room's balance. The power shift said more than any comeback could. And the later friendship shows how shame can become a starting point for growth. The moment also reframes a scar from something to hide into quiet strength. Years later, that calm truth still echoes louder than the joke ever did. This next story is about an officer who had to write the most absurd search warrant imaginable, all because someone tried to block them with a wire coat hanger while leaving a dog to suffer. There are strange cases, and then there are the kinds of cases that make you stop and laugh at the sheer absurdity of the paperwork you're filling out. This was one of those times. Out of all the warrants I've ever written, none compare to the day I had to request legal permission to bypass a wire coat hanger. The situation started out simple enough. It was an animal cruelty call, and when I arrived, the backyard gate stood wide open. From the sidewalk, I could see the dog plain as day. The scene was hard to look at. There was no food, no water, and no sign of shelter in that yard. The sun was blazing down. It was the middle of summer in the south, and heat like that can be deadly in a matter of hours. Because the gate was open and nothing blocked my entry, I walked into the yard and documented everything. I took note of the lack of provisions, the dog's condition, and I left a written notice to comply on the front door. It was a warning. Take care of the animal, provide the basics, and avoid further trouble. It was clear, fair, and gave them the opportunity to fix the problem. The next day, I came back to check. This time, the backyard was closed off. Not with a proper lock, not even with a chain. The gate was looped shut with a single wire coat hanger, twisted around like some cheap makeshift barricade. Through the slats, I could still clearly see the same sad picture. The dog was there, still with no food, no water, no shade. Nothing had changed. At that point, I had two choices. I could force entry and take the dog out immediately, but without a warrant, I risked the case unraveling later in court. Or I could go through the process of writing a warrant, yes, an actual search warrant, for the legal authority to untwist a coat hanger and step through the gate. So I did it. I sat down and drafted the most ridiculous warrant of my career. Every detail had to be spelled out. The conditions observed, the lack of compliance with the notice, the plain view evidence, and the obstruction that now required legal intervention. I presented it to a judge, and after some raised eyebrows, it was signed. The piece of paper officially granted me permission to breach a wire coat hanger in order to rescue the dog. Later that day, with warrant in hand, I returned. Carefully, I removed the coat hanger, opened the gate, and brought the dog out. It wasn't just about getting the animal to safety. It was about doing things by the book, making sure that when the inevitable complaint rolled in, because there's always a complaint, the case would be airtight. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The person responsible for the dog called the sheriff's office and reported that somebody stole my dog. They were expecting outrage, maybe sympathy. Instead, the officers who took the report explained that the dog hadn't been stolen at all. It had been rescued legally, under a judge's authority. Then they arrested him for cruelty to animals. He never got the dog back, but he did get a conviction. Looking back, it still feels surreal to think about a legal document written for the sole purpose of removing a wire coat hanger. It sounds absurd, almost comical, but the truth is, it mattered. That coat hanger represented a deliberate attempt to prevent intervention. The owner didn't bother to fix the neglect, didn't bother to get food or water, didn't care about the heat. What they did care about was trying to stop anyone from stepping in. And that's why it had to be done the right way. Because in court, precision matters. Because that dog deserved more than excuses. And because sometimes, the most ridiculous piece of paperwork is also the one that makes sure justice sticks. That's where this story finishes. The absurdity of needing a warrant for a coat hanger is what makes this story memorable, but the seriousness underneath is what gives it weight. It shows how far some people will go to block accountability, even at the expense of an animal's life. What makes it satisfying is that the attempt backfired completely. The dog was saved, and the person responsible ended up with a conviction instead of sympathy. This next story is about an employee whose manager slashed their hours without warning, only to be blindsided by that same employee later on. Working front desk at a small membership-based business had been my life for a year. I wasn't just showing up and clocking in. I was consistently one of the top salespeople on our team of 5. My hours were solid, and when I put school on pause, I told my manager I was ready to commit to over 30 hours a week. At first, it worked out perfectly. I made the money I needed, carried Sundays when no one else wanted them, and felt like I was pulling my weight. But the tone shifted hard in just a month. New rules dropped out of nowhere, stricter than anything we'd had before. Suddenly, if you didn't hit a 15% conversion rate in a month, you were on probation. You lose priority scheduling, risk losing shifts, and eventually risk losing your job. Now, anyone who's worked sales knows, sometimes the numbers just don't line up. A bad month doesn't mean you've turned into a bad employee overnight, but management didn't see it that way. Instead of improving how the business ran or finding real solutions, they put the squeeze on us at the desk. That's when my hours were gutted. Without a conversation, without a warning. I went from 30 plus hours to barely 15 a week. My paycheck, already not even minimum wage compared to most states, dropped to a level that terrified me. I reached out to my manager, hoping for some extra shifts, especially since Sundays had been my responsibility for a year. She gave me the cold corporate line. New policy, nothing she could do. She even said, "Don't stress about memberships too much," which made no sense, because our jobs were literally hanging on whether we could sell those memberships. The whole setup was shady. We were pressured to lie to customers just to get a personal connection, pretend we had family from wherever they were from, and argue with them 3 or more times if they said no. Makeup was about to be made mandatory. Phones had to be locked away with photo proof, unless you were one of her friends on staff, in which case the rules didn't apply. Chores piled onto me while she scrolled TikTok with her favorite coworker. And the kicker? I always sold the most gift cards, always did the work, and it was never recognized. During a meeting, I asked if we could at least use our average sales rate, not just one rough month, to determine probation. She lied to my face and said she didn't have access to those numbers, even though I knew for a fact she did. That was the moment I realized I was done. I left the meeting in tears, not from weakness, but from sheer exhaustion. A year of loyalty, and she couldn't even give me honesty. So I funneled that anger into action. I applied everywhere. 75 applications in a week. One of my friends noticed and connected me with a job that paid more, offered full-time hours, and had a reputation for treating their employees with actual respect. I nailed the first interview, got called back, and before I knew it, I was signing an offer letter. I had the new position locked in less than 2 weeks after my manager cut my hours. I drove straight to my old job, walked into the building, and told her I was quitting. My last day would be the following week. The look on her face was priceless. This plan of hers to motivate us with fear had backfired. Instead of saving labor costs, she was losing one of her most reliable employees. The irony didn't stop there. That final week, knowing I was free, I sold more memberships than ever before. My mood was sky high, and it showed in my numbers. Meanwhile, she scrambled to find coverage for my Sunday shifts, the ones I'd taken without complaint for an entire year. Sometimes she couldn't find anyone, which meant she had to work them herself. She fumed. She told my coworkers she was furious I hadn't told her I was job hunting. But why would I? Why would I give her that courtesy after she cut my hours, lied to me, and piled on rules that only applied to some of us? Walking out on my last day felt like shedding a weight I'd been carrying for too long. My new boss had already made me feel more valued in a single interview than my old manager had in a full year, and starting fresh somewhere that rewards hard work instead of punishing people for one bad month. That's the kind of ending you can't script better. That's the end of this story. What stands out here is how fast a toxic setup can turn around once someone takes back control. The manager thought cutting hours would push harder sales, but it just pushed the best employee out the door. The wild part is how much better the narrator performed once they knew they were leaving. That boost says a lot about how much environment matters. It's satisfying seeing someone walk away, not just with dignity intact, but with a better job waiting. This next story is about a medical student who ignored clear warnings during an examination practice and ended up facing some very unpleasant consequences. I live with ulcerative colitis, and one of the quirks about my case is that I present atypically. Because of that, my consultant often uses me as a teaching example for medical students. It's not the most glamorous role in the world, but I don't mind it. Over the years, it's become almost routine to sit in on these sessions, answer questions, and let students practice their examination skills. This particular story goes back about a decade. At the time, I hadn't been feeling my best for a couple of weeks. I had already spoken with my consultant, and we both figured it was just a bug. My blood work was still in an acceptable range, so there wasn't any immediate cause for alarm. Still, I was run down and not exactly at 100%, so I show up to one of these teaching sessions. It was a group of fourth-year medical students, right before they were heading into their gastrointestinal rotation. The way these sessions usually worked was straightforward. They'd had a lecture, then they'd get a chance to ask me questions, and after that they'd practice abdominal examinations under the consultant's supervision. The questions started, and as always, they ranged from thoughtful to downright ridiculous. Some students clearly took it seriously and asked things that showed they were genuinely curious about patient experience. Others, well, they seemed more interested in impressing each other or making the moment about themselves. I've learned to expect both ends of that spectrum. Among the group, there was one guy who stood out for the wrong reasons. I'll call him Rugby Fella. He had already been throwing out some pretty clueless questions during the Q&A, and I got the sense his peers weren't particularly fond of him either. Between comments about how confused he was and his casual talk about the date he had planned later that evening, he gave off the vibe of someone who didn't really want to be there. Now, when it came time for the examination part, things were moving along smoothly. Each student took turns palpating my abdomen, carefully pressing and checking the areas they'd just been learning about. I've had plenty of medical students do this before, and most of them are respectful, cautious, and gentle. But by the time we got about 2/3 of the way through the queue, it was Rugby Fella's turn. He barely looked at me. Instead, he kept chatting with the consultant, like I wasn't sitting right there as the person he was supposed to be examining. His hands were cold, which was uncomfortable enough, but the real problem was how hard he started pressing. Immediately, I felt my body tense up. I even jumped a little at the sudden pressure. I decided to give him a heads up. Calmly, I told him that he didn't need to press that hard to find what he was looking for. At the same time, I glanced over at the consultant, silently hoping he'd catch on and redirect the situation. But instead of easing up, Rugby Fella pressed harder. By that point, I could feel my stomach churning. I gave another warning. I told him that I felt like I might vomit. Once again, he ignored it and kept pressing. That was it. I sat up quickly, but I wasn't fast enough. My lunch came right back up, and before I could even grab for anything, it completely covered him from the neck down. I don't think I've ever seen someone turn so pale so quickly. His face went sheet white, like fresh snow. His eyes glazed over, and for a moment I thought he might lose it right there too. He stood frozen, dripping, looking like he was trapped between trying not to gag and trying to figure out what just happened. I immediately apologized, but I reminded him. I had warned him more than once. While I was wiping at my beard with a napkin, I told him that I had been serious about the nausea. Excessive pressure on my abdomen is unpredictable. Sometimes it comes out as gas, whether that's a loud belch or a foul fart. Sometimes it's bile, and sometimes, like today, it's full-on vomit. That's just part of my reality with ulcerative colitis. The other students took the lesson to heart. Every single one of them was careful and gentle after that. We managed to finish the session without further incident, though Rugby Fella basically checked out at that point. He just stood there, stunned and covered, wondering what he was supposed to do. As the group was filing out afterwards, I overheard him muttering that he couldn't possibly go on his date looking like that. I almost laughed at the irony. The guy had been so concerned with his evening plans that he didn't pay attention to the very real warnings I gave him. And now, because of that choice, those plans were completely ruined. For the next 5 years, that incident became part of the rotation's unofficial lore. Whenever new students came through, they'd hear the story about the guy who ignored warnings and ended up learning the hard way. I can't say I felt bad about it. If anything, it was probably the most memorable lesson he could have gotten. That story wraps up here. The funniest part of that story is how it proves that ignoring warnings can backfire in the most direct way possible. What makes it even better is that it wasn't just an accident. The guy had been told multiple times and still didn't listen. That kind of moment probably stuck with everyone in that room way longer than any lecture ever could. Honestly, it turned into the kind of story that lives on because it's just too perfect not to retell. This next story is about a worker who quietly cut ties with a toxic coworker instead of feeding into constant gossip and manipulation. At one point in my career, I had this coworker I'll call Candy. At first, I thought she was great. We hung out a lot, and she seemed like the kind of person who could make a workday a little more fun. But after a while, I started noticing things that made me feel uneasy. Candy was a huge gossip. She always had some story about someone else in the office, and she delivered it like it was urgent news. She also had this way of never accepting no for an answer. If she wanted something from you, she'd keep pressing until she got her way. And the worst part was how she'd try to manipulate people, pushing conversations, twisting words, and finishing sentences for others in ways that completely misrepresented what they were actually saying. The moment I knew I had to cut ties came during one of those sentence finishing moments. I was talking, and she cut in to finish my sentence with something blatantly racist. I froze. I hadn't even hinted at what she said, and hearing it come out of her mouth under the guise of completing my thought was shocking. Right then I realized I couldn't keep hanging around her like nothing was wrong. But here's the thing. Candy loved confrontation. She thrived on it, and she had a track record of taking conflicts to HR when someone stood up to her. So I knew confronting her directly would only backfire. Instead, I came up with a quieter solution. I'd avoid her as much as I possibly could. Remote work gave me the perfect chance. I kept to myself, worked from home, and limited interactions. But when people started returning to the office, Candy came back too, and she jumped right back into her old patterns of gossip. I remember one afternoon, I was standing with a group of coworkers, just chatting casually. Candy joined us and immediately launched into her usual gossip routine. I didn't say a word. Instead, I excused myself and went back to my desk. I figured removing myself from the situation was better than engaging. Candy noticed. She came by and asked if I was okay. Whenever I had to interact with her after that, I kept it short. Just small talk. No depth, no personal details, nothing she could twist or spin into drama. The more I distanced myself, the more frustrated she became. She wasn't getting the reactions she used to feed off of. Eventually, I ended up retiring earlier than I originally planned. By that time, most of the other people in our little circle had already transferred out, gotten promoted, or moved on in some way. Candy was left with no choice but to hang out with the same people she had spent years gossiping about. It was almost like her behavior boxed her in. Looking back, it was one of the hardest things I've done. Not in terms of avoiding her, but in learning how much control I had over my own frustration. Instead of fueling the fire, I took myself out of it. And in the process, I figured out how to recognize people like her earlier on, so I wouldn't get stuck in the same cycle again. That story wraps up here. Sometimes silence really does speak louder than words. What stood out to me is how choosing not to engage ended up being more effective than direct confrontation ever could have been. It's tough when someone thrives on drama because they expect you to feed into it. The patience it takes to just step back instead is underrated. And in the end, it's almost like the coworker trapped themselves with their own behavior. This next story is about a husband who got drawn into an affair with his wife's cousin after her family started planting doubts in his marriage. Looking back, it's hard not to shake the feeling that the whole situation was set up from the very beginning. My marriage didn't just fall apart overnight. It unraveled piece by piece until it completely collapsed, and my wife's family had their fingerprints all over it. It started about 6 months ago at a family barbecue. We were all outside, talking, laughing, passing around food. Everything felt normal until my wife's mom pulled me aside. I thought she just wanted a quick chat, but instead she started dropping comments that immediately unsettled me. She said I deserved better than her daughter, that my wife was too focused on work, too career-driven, and not giving me the attention a man should expect. I didn't know what to say. I tried to laugh it off, but she kept pressing. Life is short, she told me. Maybe you should explore your options. It wasn't just a passing remark. It was something that lodged itself in my mind. even when I didn't want it to. 2 weeks later, my wife's cousin started texting me. At first, it was innocent enough, just memes, light jokes, random messages here and there. But then she began opening up about her relationship troubles, complaining about her boyfriend and how unhappy she was. That's when her mom's words started echoing in my head again, making me second guess everything. One night, after hours of back and forth texts, the cousin told me, "You're such a good listener. My boyfriend never talks to me like this." Without thinking much, I replied, "Your cousin doesn't really talk to me much anymore either." That was the first real slip, the first time the boundary blurred. Not long after, she suggested meeting for coffee. "Just as friends," she said. I convinced myself it was harmless. The first few meetups stayed innocent, but by the fourth, the line was crossed. We ended up at her apartment, and that's when the affair started. I told myself it was just physical, that my wife and I had grown apart, that this was a temporary escape. But the cousin fed into that doubt. She kept telling me things like, "You deserve someone who appreciates you," and "I can't believe she takes you for granted." For 2 months, I lived a double life. I hated myself for it, but every time I tried to end it, she'd cry and say she was falling for me. Meanwhile, her mom would drop little comments about how much happier I seemed lately. Then came the night everything blew up. My wife was using my laptop because hers needed charging. I wasn't worried because I wasn't thinking, but the messages with her cousin popped up automatically. She read every word. When I walked into the bedroom, she was sitting there, perfectly calm. "Get out," she said. I panicked. "Let me explain." She looked at me coldly. "Explain what? That my own family convinced you to cheat on me? That you've been with my cousin while I was working overtime to save for our vacation?" There was nothing I could say that would fix it. She gave me 1 hour to pack my things. In desperation, I called her mom, thinking she might admit her role. Instead, she acted innocent. "Oh honey, I never told you to have an affair. I just said you deserve better communication." She twisted it completely, claiming she was shocked and disappointed. The cousin blocked me that same day. She slipped right back into her relationship with her boyfriend like nothing had happened. And her mom? She painted me as the only guilty one, telling everyone I had misunderstood her words. My wife filed for divorce immediately. She took half our savings, kept the house, and somehow convinced my own parents that I was entirely at fault. She even moved into their guest room while I ended up in a tiny studio apartment. My dad's words cut the deepest. "We raised you better than this. She's family now, and you threw it away." The hardest part is seeing her now. When I visit my parents, if she's there, she gets up and leaves the room. My mom won't even let me stay for dinner if she's around. Everyone knows. Her family, my family, all our friends. The cousin pretends none of it ever happened, and her mom acts like she barely remembers me. In the end, I lost everything. My wife was loyal, hardworking, and building a future for us. And while she was doing that, I was destroying it with people who didn't care about me at all. That's the end of this story. This one hits hard. What stands out most is how fast things spiraled once outside voices started getting involved. The calm way his wife ended it says everything. It wasn't even a fight. It was final. The fact that even his own parents took her side shows just how much damage was done. It's one of those stories that sticks because the fallout reached way further than expected. This next story is about a fanfic writer who gave away more than they meant to by hiding clues in their work. When I was about 8 years old, I started learning French. At first, it was just another subject I had to take, but over time it grew into something much bigger. Living in a French-speaking part of the world meant that the language wasn't just in school. It was everywhere. Street signs, conversations, TV shows, even the way neighbors greeted each other in passing. By the time I hit my teenage years, French wasn't just something I studied, it was a natural part of how I thought and communicated. Around the same time, I discovered online fandom communities, and Star Wars quickly became the one I spent the most time in. I wasn't just casually reading the stories, fan fiction became a huge part of my daily life. I'd spend hours after school reading new updates, commenting on chapters, and even trying my hand at writing stories myself. I gravitated toward writers who were interested in the same slice of the timeline I loved. Over time, I built little connections with other fans who shared that passion. But I was also young, very young. I had gotten into the fandom world before I was even a teenager, and that meant I carried around this constant awareness of how risky the internet could be. I had read all the warnings about online predators, about doxing, about people pretending to be kids when they weren't. And those warnings weren't just background noise to me, they stuck. So I built up a wall of privacy. Nobody online knew where I was really from, and nobody knew I could speak French. That was my secret. Looking back, it might seem a little extreme. Not telling anyone what country I lived in or what languages I spoke feels like overkill. But at 12 years old, terrified of stranger danger, it made sense. It gave me a layer of security. Even as I got older and more comfortable, I still didn't share that piece of myself. By my mid-teens, I was still active in the community. I'd made friends, I'd written stories, and I'd read thousands of words from other people who loved the universe as much as I did. Then one day, one of the writers I followed introduced a new villain in her story. His name was Darth Fils. At first glance, it probably looked like a completely normal Star Wars villain name. Darth names always sounded strange and sinister. Darth Vader, Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis. To the average reader, Fils just fit into that mold. But for me, it was impossible to miss. Fils is French for son. The moment I saw it, the answer jumped off the page. This wasn't just some random villain. It was clearly Luke Skywalker, written as if he had turned to the dark side. The thrill of catching that hidden meaning was huge. I couldn't hold it in. I messaged her right away, practically bursting with excitement, telling her my theory about the character's real identity. It was like stumbling across an inside joke that only I could get. She responded with laughter. She admitted that she hadn't expected her mostly American readership to notice the name at all. To them, it would just be another dark and edgy title. But she knew someone out there who spoke French might catch it, and I had. She seemed amused that I had solved her little puzzles so quickly. After that, she kept up the habit. Future villains started appearing with names that carried hidden meanings, though they weren't always as obvious. Some were drawn from Latin roots, and I'll admit, those stumped me more than once. I'd sit there staring at the names, trying to work out their significance, sometimes spending longer on decoding a single name than on reading the actual story. It felt a little like being back in school, piecing together translations, only this time the classroom was a fanfic forum. Still, nothing matched that first moment with Darth Fils. That was the time when my little secret, my knowledge of French, something I'd never told anyone online, gave me the upper hand. For years, nobody in that community knew where I was from or what languages I spoke, but that slip of a name revealed just how different my perspective was compared to most readers. That's where the story ends. I like how this one is about such a small detail, but still feels memorable. It shows how a simple choice, like naming a character, can land totally differently depending on who's reading. For the writer, it was just a fun twist. For the storyteller, it turned into this exciting little discovery that stuck with them for years. Sometimes those tiny moments are the ones that really stay with you. This next story is about a couple who let a friend stay in their home, only to find out he completely took advantage of their generosity. My husband and I live abroad, and earlier this year we found ourselves in a situation we definitely didn't expect. A mutual acquaintance of ours, let's call him K, reached out saying he'd been scammed with an apartment rental and now had nowhere to stay. At first, we were cautious. We only offered him a weekend at our place, figuring that was enough time for him to sort himself out. But during that first stay, he seemed polite and grateful. He helped around the house, didn't act entitled, and gave the impression of someone who just needed a bit of support during a rough patch. Because of that, we softened. When he asked if he could stay longer, about 20 days in total, we agreed. We thought, well, he's been decent so far, what's the harm? That was the beginning of the trouble. Over the course of those 3 weeks, little things started to add up. He never once bought groceries. Multiple times he acted like he was going to pay, but conveniently forgot his wallet. Other times, he claimed he could only use Apple Pay, which wasn't even accepted at our local supermarket. So the responsibility for food always fell back on us. The real problem, though, was how much he ate. He didn't just take his share. He'd clear out way more than both of us combined. I remember one night in particular, my husband and I had ordered pizzas. We shared one between the two of us. Kay, on the other hand, ate the entire second pizza and then half of a third one, all without paying a single cent. It was frustrating, but at the time we told ourselves to let it go. He was in a tough spot and we didn't want to make things awkward. After he left, we kept things friendly. We didn't cut him off. And months later, when we were planning a 17-day trip, we actually considered him again. He'd been struggling with rent, and we thought it might help both of us if we let him stay at our house in exchange for taking care of our dog. That way, we'd save money on a sitter, and he'd have a free place to stay. To make it as easy as possible, I even wrote up a detailed Google Doc. It had everything: dog care instructions, house rules, gym access, and even notes about food. I specifically told him he was welcome to eat anything that was going to expire while we were gone. That included fruit, vegetables, yogurt, things like that. When we came back from our trip, though, I was floored. Everything was gone. And I don't mean just the perishables. The entire fridge, freezer, and pantry had been cleared out. He ate through 2 full jars of jam, a jar of peanut butter, a massive Costco-sized bottle of olive oil, condiments, rice, snacks, cheese, literally everything. He even went through my husband's supplements, things like protein powder, collagen, and creatine. On top of that, one of our ceramic pans was completely ruined. And the worst part is, I'm not even sure he ate it all while he was there. The sheer volume of stuff that disappeared made me think he may have taken some of it with him when he left. When I tried to bring it up, I kept it simple. I only asked him to replace the pan. Instead of apologizing, he mocked me. "It's just a pan," he said. "Why are you making it such a big deal?" That one sentence summed up the whole situation for me. He had no respect for us, our home, or the generosity we'd shown him. Now, since then, he's been acting like nothing happened. He texts me, tries to make plans to hang out, and behaves as though clearing out our entire kitchen was no big deal. I told my husband that I don't ever want him in our house again. For me, the trust is gone. I feel completely disrespected and taken advantage of. My husband, though, doesn't see it the same way. He says I'm being too harsh. He believes if he still wants to stay friends with Kay, that's his choice. And I shouldn't make it into such a hard rule. But the way I see it, once someone shows you who they are, you don't invite them to do it again. That's where this story finishes. What really jumps out here is how casual the guy was about taking advantage. It wasn't just a few extra snacks. He treated their home like a free-for-all. The detail about mocking the ruined pan almost makes it worse, because it shows he didn't even feel bad about it. It's the kind of situation that leaves you questioning how much you can ever trust someone again. This next story is about a college diner worker who uses a simple act to shut down customers who scream over tiny mistakes. I'm in college and work weekends at a little diner just off campus. It's the kind of place with a squeaky front door, chrome stools that spin, and a bell that rings whenever the kitchen sets a plate in the pass. The coffee is strong, the pancakes come off the griddle bigger than the plates, and most regulars are easy. Newspapers, quiet jokes, extra napkins. I like the rhythm. I refill mugs, call orders by memory, and learn which table wants jam before they ask. Every so often, though, somebody arrives already looking for a fight. It's never about anything big. It's toast that's too crispy, coffee that isn't boiling, or hash browns that leaned a shade too dark under the heat lamp. I try everything first. Apology, remake, reheat, calm voice. Usually that's all it takes. And then there are the times it isn't. One afternoon, an older guy ordered Sunnyside eggs and a short stack. I set the plate down and he stared at the yolks like they'd broken a rule. Before I could offer anything, he raised his voice. Conversations around the room thinned out, and I felt that prickle of attention you get when a crowd turns. I checked the ticket. The order was right. I offered to swap the plate anyway. He kept going, louder, pointing at the eggs like they'd done it on purpose. My manager is my age, a student too, and he walked over with the calm he uses when Plan A is done. He didn't argue, didn't explain kitchen temps, didn't mention policy. He looked at me and said, steady and low, "That's it. You're fired." It took me a beat to catch on, and then I leaned in. I lifted my apron, let my hands shake just enough, and said softly, "Please, I'm paying my way through school. I can't lose this job." My manager kept his face blank, arms folded. The change in the customer happened almost instantly. His anger drained out like someone turned off a faucet. No, it's not that serious," he said, hands up. "Don't fire them." I overreacted. The room exhaled. My manager gave a tiny nod. I tied my apron back on, and the man ate the very eggs he'd just shouted about. We didn't plan it beforehand. We just stumbled onto a reset that works when someone turns a $5 breakfast into a stage. After that day, we kept the trick tucked away. We don't use it for honest mistakes or reasonable frustration. We use it when a person decides the server is there to absorb whatever they brought in from the parking lot. The second time was a woman with burnt toast. It was dark, but not a lost cause. I offered fresh slices. She ramped up instead of down. My manager stepped in. Same even tone, same line. I let the apron sag and kept my eyes on the floor. She went pale and rushed to say, "Wait, please don't fire them. I'm having a rough morning." She took the new toast, tipped well, and left a small sorry on the receipt. I slid it into my order book and finished my shift lighter than I'd started. I told a few friends about our act and got split reactions. Some thought it was harmless improv that protects your sanity. Others said it was wrong because the customers might drive home believing they cost a broke student their job. I sat with that for a week. I pictured someone gripping the wheel, replaying the moment, feeling awful. Here's where I landed. We try service first, always. We remake, replace, and comp when we should. We talk like people. The performance is the emergency brake we pull when someone won't meet us halfway. And it ends with relief they can see. I'm still there taking tables. They hear my manager say, "We'll try again." The message isn't, "You ruined a life." It's, "Your behavior has weight." There's also the quiet benefit I didn't expect. The act gives me a release valve. On nights after a blow-up, I don't carry the echo of yelling home in my chest. I remember the second a face softens and a voice comes back to normal. That moment of recognition, that, "Oh, right, you're a person," makes the next hour of coffee refills feel doable. We've gotten better at the timing. If my manager jumps too soon, it reads as a skit. If I beg too big, it looks phony. So we keep it small. One calm sentence, one short plea, a reset. Only when the line has clearly been crossed. Most people don't want to be the reason someone gets fired. That idea turns a mirror toward them faster than any policy speech I could give. Do I worry about ethics? A little. I'm not made of stone. But each time we've used it, the room shifts from sharp to soft. A kid 2 booths over stops staring. The cook's shoulders drop. The tension leaks out through the doorway, and breakfast becomes breakfast again. Nobody leaves harmed. Someone leaves kinder. It's a trade I can live with. At the end of the day, I still clock out with the same pay. I wipe syrup from table edges, scoop ice for sweet tea, and slide checks under the sugar caddy. The regular with the napkin cranes waves on his way out. The bell at the pass sings one last time. And every once in a while, when the world is loud and a stranger brings that noise to our counter, a single sentence changes the whole story. I tie my apron a little tighter, breathe, and get back to work. That's where the story ends. What gets me is how quickly people soften once they think their outburst actually matters. It's a clean reset without shouting back. I like that it's used with restraint, more safety switch than prank. If a tiny performance protects a student's peace on a busy weekend, I'm okay with it. This next story is about a teenager caught in the fallout of their dad's long-term affair, who finally snapped after their dad tried to turn them against their mom. I'm 16 now, and my brother's 14. For most of my life, and literally all of his, our dad has had a second family. He had another woman, lived a double life, and had 3 kids with her. She already had a kid around my age, and dad stepped into that role too. The kicker? She knew he was married. She knew about us. And still, they built this whole family together in secret. They kept it hidden for a decade before it all came crashing down. And it wasn't even dad who told us. The other woman basically told my mom herself. That one moment shattered everything. It broke my mom, and for me and my brother, it turned our entire world upside down. The worst part is, they didn't even act like they felt bad. Instead, they expected us to go along with it. Dad pushed hard for us to blend with his second family. He told us over and over again that we were all siblings now, that we needed to have each other's backs, that there couldn't be favoritism. But the truth is, my brother and I only care about each other. We don't care about his other kids. We don't try to include them. We don't go out of our way to build anything with them. Honestly, we've got our own lives. We have semi-wealthy grandparents who make sure we're taken care of. We've got a mom whose side of the family supports her and us completely. When his other kids look at us with jealousy, I don't care. When people hint that we should share more, I don't care. My brother and I decided long ago, we're each other's favorite, and that's all that matters. As for Dad, I hate him. I think he's sick for what he did. I don't want a relationship with him or with that second family. But thanks to the judge, I still have to see him about 10 days a month. More than I'd like, but less than before. So now my brother and I treat it like a countdown. We've even set our phones for the day we turn 18. Once that happens, we're done. We won't ever have to see him again. Every time we talk about it, it feels like a small relief. Through all of this, my mom never badmouths him. She doesn't drag his other family, not to us anyway. She's civil. She keeps her head up. I have no idea what she says when we're not around, but I know she doesn't try to poison us against him. Meanwhile, Dad does the exact opposite. He punishes her by demanding she do things for the other kids. She never does. It got even worse recently. Dad and his wife both lost their jobs over the summer and only found lower paying ones later. When school started back up, Mom covered the lunch accounts for me and my brother. Dad demanded she do the same for his other kids. She refused, and that's when he lost it. He told the other kids that Mom wanted them to starve. He showed them pictures of her taking us out to eat, trying to make her look like some villain. The whole thing disgusted me. How could he cheat on her, build another family, and then demand she pay for it? At dinner one night, he brought it up again. He claimed I was being hostile because I wasn't sitting there nodding along. I finally snapped. I told him he was disgusting for trying to make my mom responsible for his affair family. He pushed back, insisting they were my siblings too, that Mom should step up because of us. I didn't hold back. I told him straight out they will never be my family. I told him he was an awful person. He tried to lecture me, said to watch my language, and then turned it on Mom. He said she was worse than him because only a monster would hate kids and refuse to take care of them. He said I should hate her for not stepping in. That's when I told him something I don't regret at all, that nothing he says could ever make me see my mom as worse than him. In my eyes, nobody sucks as much as he does. My mom could make choices I didn't like, and I still wouldn't care, because she would never be the kind of person he is. He didn't take that well. He said Mom would let those kids die rather than help, and I told him I don't care. He pushed harder, saying I needed to see the truth, that I should stop treating him like a monster, because what he did to Mom wasn't about us. He claimed he gave us more than she ever did. I told him I will always hate him. After that, he ran to his mom, my grandma. She called me up and told me I shouldn't be so set in my thinking. She said I shouldn't pick sides, and that I shouldn't hate my dad. But the damage is done. He made his choices, and I've made mine. That's the end of the story. What stands out is how the mom stayed civil the whole time, even while being blamed for things that were never her responsibility. The countdown to 18 says a lot too. It's clear how ready those kids are to move on. The dad trying to spin everything just makes the fallout worse. This next story is about someone who unexpectedly became the farm upstate where people drop off pets they don't want anymore. You know that old cliche parents use when they don't want to tell their kids the truth about a pet being given away? The one about the animal going to a nice farm upstate? Well, that's me. I'm literally that farm. I live in the northern part of my state, just outside a large US city. The property itself is small, a farm I inherited from my parents, but it's enough land that people seem to think of it as the perfect place to unload an animal they don't want anymore. I didn't set out to be this person, but somehow it's just what I've become. It happens in all kinds of ways. Sometimes people come up to me directly and ask if I'll take an animal off their hands. Other times, they don't even bother to ask. They just leave the creature behind. There have been afternoons where I've sat on my front porch and literally watched a car pull up, someone hop out, toss an animal over the fence into my field, and then drive away without a word. Over the years, I've taken in more than 200 animals, and not just dogs or cats, though plenty of those too. I'm talking about all kinds of exotic and unusual creatures. At this point, the list looks like a roll call of a very strange zoo. Chickens, turkeys, guinea fowl, peacocks, emus, rheas, goats, sheep, llamas, alpacas, capybaras, rabbits, hamsters, guinea pigs, and even the occasional deer or raccoon. It's the kind of menagerie that would make people stop in their tracks if they walked through my pastures. Dogs and cats are a little trickier. Most of them don't mix well with livestock, so unless they're especially calm or fit in naturally, I usually end up rehoming them through shelters. Only 2 dogs and 2 cats have ever stayed for good. The rest needed a more traditional environment. The strange thing is, I don't advertise. I've never put out flyers or made a website. Somehow word just travels. Maybe it's because I'm visible from the freeway, maybe it's just local whispers, but people know. And once people know, it becomes part of your identity. Of course, there's a heavy cost to it all. Feeding, housing, and caring for this many animals isn't cheap. It takes time, energy, and money, and not every story has a happy ending. When exotic animals get sick, I often don't have the resources to give them the specialized medical care they need. I've lost animals because of that, and it's hard every single time. Still, I can't seem to bring myself to turn anything away. Even if a creature is already dying, I'd rather it have a place to land than be tossed aside with nowhere to go. I won't pretend it's easy. There are days when it feels overwhelming, when the responsibility presses down hard. But despite all that, I'll probably keep doing it. Because as strange as it sounds, this role found me. I didn't ask for it, but I've accepted it. For better or worse, I've become the farm upstate. That story stops there. This one feels kind of bittersweet. It's amazing that someone is willing to step up like that, but you can also hear how heavy it is for them. The image of people tossing animals out of their cars is wild, and yet this farm has become a safety net anyway. It really shows how one person can end up carrying a responsibility nobody else wanted. This next story is about a prison nurse who watched their director of nursing deliberately destroy inmates' only way of requesting medical care. I work in the medical unit of a state prison, and believe it or not, I love my job. Most people assume it must be awful, but I honestly get treated better by the inmates here than I have by patients in urgent care or family medicine clinics on the outside. The men here are usually glad to see us. They know we're not here to punish them, and for the most part, they treat us with respect. Even the correctional officers tend to be no-nonsense and straightforward. It's rough work, sure, but it's real, and I like that. Of course, the environment comes with its challenges. These men are in prison for a reason. Some of them are manipulative, lazy, or entitled. They can be crude, demanding, and sometimes completely impossible to deal with. A few of them should honestly be in secure psychiatric facilities instead of general population. They'll lie over the strangest things, and they'll use whatever they can get their hands on to get high. I learned the hard way that even something like an albuterol inhaler can be abused. On top of that, they're bored out of their minds. So sometimes their only entertainment is making our lives miserable. Some of them have committed crimes so horrifying, you don't even want to think about it. But at the end of the day, they're still human beings. Their punishment is being in prison. My job is to make sure they get the healthcare they're entitled to. That's not optional. The Constitution and the Supreme Court have made it clear. It's their right. And if someone can't handle that, they shouldn't work in corrections healthcare. Unfortunately, my former director of nursing, the DON, was one of those people. She'd been in the job for years, but she was long past burnout. She had an awful attitude, never trained anyone, brushed off questions, and treated patients with open hostility. She didn't even bother hiding her contempt. And then came the day that cemented in my mind just how wrong she was for the role. Normally, the infirmary nurse manages all the health service requests, or HSRs. These are forms inmates use to communicate with the medical staff. If they need a medication refill, have new symptoms, want to schedule an appointment, or need mental health support, it all goes through an HSR. Unless it's a full-blown emergency, like someone clutching their chest or bleeding out, the HSR is the only way for inmates to ask for help. Most of the prison uses electronic kiosks, but 2 blocks, segregation, and H block don't have them. Why? Budget. It's not my call. So in those areas, the men still rely on paper HSRs. Every day I'd go out to H block, collect their stack of requests, and bring them back to the infirmary nurse to process. That day, the infirmary nurse wasn't there. The DON was covering. I dropped the stack of about 20 HSRs on her desk, just like always. She looked at me with pure disdain and asked, "What the fuck did you just put on my desk?" I explained that they were the HSRs from H block. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she picked up the stack and threw the whole pile straight into the trash. I stared at her, dumbfounded, and she smirked at me, making some crack about my face resembling a goldfish. Then she told me to go do something useful, like quit. I stammered out that those were the only medical requests H block had, that they had no kiosks, no other way to reach us. She knew all of this. She'd been working there for 15 years. She just shrugged, pulled the papers back out of the trash, and fed them into the shredder one by one. I stood there, helpless. Those HSRs don't exist anywhere else. There's no backup, no copy. If an inmate sends multiple requests for the same issue, they get in trouble for it. The rule is send one, then wait. So someone could have written, I think I'm passing a kidney stone, or I've been vomiting blood, and now it was gone forever. When I tried to protest, she brushed me off, saying none of them deserved special treatment just because they had to use paper instead of kiosks. She even justified it by pointing to one guy on the block who constantly faked seizures. Badly, too. His performances were so ridiculous, he didn't even bother falling down, just waved his arms around like a zombie, until a CO had to call a response team. But one obnoxious inmate doesn't justify ignoring everyone else's medical needs. Later, when I asked around, I found out this wasn't unusual. She did it regularly. Other staff even had a workaround. If she was covering, the COs would announce on H Block that medical requests needed to be resubmitted the next day. There was literally a system in place to deal with her tantrums. It still eats at me. She didn't kill anyone that day, but the fact that she could casually erase people's only access to healthcare just because she didn't feel like dealing with them showed how deeply wrong her attitude was. These weren't requests for pizza delivery. They were requests for medical care. The only silver lining is that she eventually left. She stepped down from her director role and took a regular nursing position at another prison. Losing her authority was the best possible outcome, because someone that callous should never have been in charge of anyone's healthcare, let alone in a place where patients already have so few options. That story wraps up here. That's honestly chilling. The idea of someone shredding medical requests just because they're annoyed says everything about how badly power can be abused. It makes sense why the staff had their own workaround, but the fact they needed one at all is telling. It's a relief she's not in charge anymore, because some jobs can't afford that kind of indifference. This next story is about a hotel worker dealing with a furious guest who demanded free nights and a written apology after her own mistake left her without a room. Working at a hotel is one of those jobs where you never quite know what you're going to get when someone walks through the door. Most of the time, it's fine. People are traveling for work, on vacation, or just passing through. You check them in, hand them their keys, answer a couple of questions, and they're on their way. But every now and then, you run into someone who makes you wonder how they even get through life. On this particular night, the hotel was packed. We had a film crew in town working on the second season of a show, and our company had a contract with the studio. That meant nearly every room was booked out, and every single one of the 65 rooms we had available was sold. When we're at full capacity like that, it's hectic. Phones are ringing constantly, people are streaming in, and we're juggling dozens of requests all at once. In the middle of that rush, a woman walked in to check in. At first, she seemed friendly enough, smiling, making small talk, nothing out of the ordinary. I pulled up her reservation on the system, and the moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. Her reservation had been canceled. The reason? No credit card was ever put on file to hold it. I explained this as calmly as I could, apologizing over and over. I told her exactly what I thought happened. Without a credit card attached, the system cancels the reservation automatically. I reassured her that if anything opened up in the next couple of hours, I'd set it aside for her and call immediately. She didn't yell. She didn't get upset. She just nodded and walked out, and for a moment I thought it would all be okay. But 3 hours later, she stormed back in, and this time she was furious. She started yelling right there in the lobby, her voice carrying over the sound of the TV and the chatter of other guests. She demanded an entire week of free nights. She demanded a pile of complimentary loyalty points. She demanded a written apology. And of course, she demanded to speak to my manager immediately. Her words tumbled out rapid fire. I've been coming to this hotel for years and years, and this is how you treat me? You're leaving me on the street like some nobody? I'll have your job for this. The whole time she was going on, her husband stood by quietly. You could see the embarrassment written all over his face. Unlike her, he was polite, genuinely trying to understand what had happened, and asking if I had any recommendations for other hotels nearby. He even thanked me while she continued to yell. Watching him, I honestly wondered how he managed to put up with her day after day. In the end, there was nothing more I could do. The hotel was completely sold out. There wasn't a single room to give, and no amount of screaming was going to change that. Eventually, they left, still unhappy, and I was left standing behind the desk, wondering why people think yelling fixes anything. The part that gets me is that she could have easily avoided the whole situation. Our system always calls multiple times earlier in the day if a reservation is missing a credit card. If no one picks up, it eventually cancels. On top of that, she could have double-checked her reservation through the app. It would have shown canceled clear as day. But she didn't do any of those things. She just showed up assuming everything would be fine. I've worked here long enough to know that no matter how polite and professional you are, and no matter how hard you try to keep everything organized, there's always someone ready to blow up at you for something completely out of your control. That night was just another reminder of it. But I will say this, my manager is the best. She has our backs no matter what. If someone calls to complain or tries to escalate, she'll step right in, and she doesn't let people push her around. She knows exactly how some guests can be, and she's not afraid to dish the same energy right back at them if they're being unreasonable. Just knowing that makes nights like that a lot easier to handle. That's the end of this story. This one's a perfect example of how some people think yelling equals power. It's almost funny how the husband tried to keep things calm while she was going nuclear in the lobby. At the end of the day, no amount of shouting creates a room out of thin air. Sometimes the best part of these stories is knowing the worker's manager actually has their back. This next story is about a 19-year-old who suddenly had to step up as the parent figure for their younger siblings after their mom passed away. 2 months ago, my whole life flipped upside down. My mom passed away, and at 19 years old, I suddenly became the person my siblings looked to for everything. I've always been the oldest, but before this, being the oldest just meant helping out sometimes, or giving advice, or being the one people teased for being in charge. I never imagined it would mean stepping into an actual parental role, but that's where I am now, with a 14-year-old sibling and an 8-year-old sibling depending on me. At first, I didn't really process it. I think I was still in shock. I told myself that as long as we had each other, we'd be fine. I put this picture in my head that we'd figure things out together, and it would all just work. In a way, that was my way of coping. I didn't let myself think about what the future would really look like, because the moment I did, the weight of it all felt unbearable. But reality has a way of catching up with you, and now I realize I underestimated just how heavy this responsibility is. It's not that my siblings are bad kids. They aren't. They're actually amazing. They're respectful, they listen, they don't cause the kind of trouble some kids their ages might. But no matter how good they are, raising kids, being responsible for kids, is hard. It's the constant decision making. Every day there's something to figure out. School schedules, meals, bills, what's fair when they're arguing, how to comfort them when they miss mom. I used to only worry about what classes I'd take, what I wanted to do with my life, and maybe how to balance a part-time job with my own plans. Now, every choice I make ripples out and affects 2 other lives. They look up to me for everything. If they're scared, they come to me. If something breaks in the house, it's my job to fix it. If they need help with school, I'm the one sitting down at the table with them, trying to remember algebra or spelling rules. When they need encouragement, I have to be the strong one, even if I feel like crumbling inside. There's no older sibling who helps out sometimes anymore. There's just me, because I'm the oldest, and that means I have to figure it out. Some nights I lay in bed and wonder if I've bitten off more than I can chew. I'll feel overwhelmed, stressed, and unsure if I'm doing enough. But the thing is, I didn't really have a choice. And even if I did, I could never walk away from them. I love my siblings too much for that. I would do anything for them. Still, that doesn't erase the fact that this is so much harder than I ever imagined. Every day is a mix of pride and exhaustion. Pride when I see them smiling, or when I manage to juggle everything and keep the house running. Exhaustion when the weight of responsibility feels like it's crushing me. What I've learned is that love gets you through a lot, but it doesn't magically make the struggle disappear. I really underestimated just how hard this was going to be. That's where the story ends. This is another heavy-hitting one. It shows how fast someone's whole life can change, especially at an age where most people are still figuring themselves out. It's clear how much they care about their siblings, but also how much weight they're carrying. You can tell it's not easy, but the love they have for each other is what's keeping everything together. This next story is about an IT worker who got pulled into a shocking investigation when an employee tried selling company data. Working IT at a medical company isn't usually glamorous. Most of the time, it's password resets, troubleshooting apps, helping staff with laptops, and occasionally running audits when something looks suspicious. But every so often, something lands on your desk that reminds you why security matters. And this was one of those times. It all started with a message from a manager. They asked me to block one of their employees' accounts, let's call him user 1, and to pull a complete access log for everything he had touched while supposedly on PTO. For context, our company handles extremely sensitive information. We're talking patient data, care plans, medications, staff details for hospitals, the kind of information that can't afford to be mishandled. So, when a request like this comes in, you don't ask questions, you just act. Step 1 was disabling the account and revoking any active login sessions. Once that was done, I started pulling logs from all the systems: Entra, Intune, Teams, CRMs, everything I could get my hands on. I pushed them through a tool we use to make reports more readable for non-technical folks, scanned them quickly to make sure nothing looked broken, and sent the packet over to the manager. Not even half an hour later, user 1 walked up to my desk. He looked casual at first, but the moment he spoke, alarms went off in my head. "Hey, it says my account is locked out," he said. "Can you unlock it for me? The self-service thing isn't working." I smiled politely and said, "Sorry, you'll need to speak to your manager." His whole demeanor shifted. "Well, I need to work, so unlock it." I cut him off, repeating in a firmer tone, "Speak to your manager." That's when his face went pale. He knew something was up. A moment later, his manager walked out of the lift, spotted him, and told him to come into a meeting room. They asked him to leave his laptop with me, which he did, looking uneasy. The blinds came down in the meeting room, and I figured something serious was happening. About 20 minutes later, 2 strangers appeared at my desk. No visitor badges, no company lanyards, just 2 people in plain clothes asking, "You the IT guy?" I asked for ID, and that's when they flashed police credentials. My brain did a double take. They told me they were there for user 1's laptop. I handed it over, and they slipped it into an evidence bag like something out of a crime show. Then they gave me a card with their contact info and asked me to forward all the logs I had pulled. They'd already looped me and our InfoSec team into the email chain with the manager. At this point, my curiosity was through the roof. I watched shows like Law and Order in my downtime, and here it was unfolding right in front of me. I asked if they wanted anything specific, but the officer just said, "Everything." Not long after, they went into the meeting room. From my desk, I couldn't hear much. Our meeting rooms are soundproofed, but I caught muffled yelling. 20 minutes later, I watched as user 1 was escorted out of the building in handcuffs. The manager came back over to thank me for my help. They explained the whole point of locking user 1 out, in office, was to force him to hand over the machine on the spot. Then with a half smile, they promised to tell me more details later if possible. So I forwarded the logs and waited. For a week, I heard nothing. Life went back to the usual flow of tickets, updates, and support calls. Finally, today, I got the rest of the story. During lunch, the manager filled me in. Turns out user 1 had tried to sell company data. He'd been prowling darknet forums and thought he'd found buyers. But those buyers weren't criminals. They were actually part of a security company that monitors those forums, pretends to be interested, and then reports breaches to the real owners. User 1 gave them samples of company CRM files, thinking he was being clever. But here's the kicker. Those files are encrypted to only work inside our systems. He didn't realize they'd be useless outside without the proper software. Unfortunately for him, the security company had tools that could read the files, which is how they confirmed the information was legit. And the fatal flaw? Every time someone downloads a file, the code embeds the username of the person who pulled it. His name was literally written into the data he tried to sell. There was no escaping it. So, in the end, no patient data was leaked. Nothing made it out into the wild. User 1 thought he was on the verge of cashing in, but instead he was handing over evidence directly tied back to himself. As I sat there hearing all this, I couldn't help but think, this was one hell of a way to start a Monday. One of the wildest days I've ever had on the job. That's where the story ends. This one feels like something straight out of a TV drama. The police showing up in plain clothes, the evidence bag, the soundproof meeting room. It's wild. What makes it better is how the guy didn't even understand the files he tried to sell were basically useless, outside the system. It's both intense and a little bit funny that he left a digital signature on everything he touched. This next story is about a woman who got cut in line at a butcher shop by someone who assumed she didn't understand Spanish. I'm about as white as you can get. Pale skin, European ancestry, the whole package. Think saltine cracker levels of white. But despite how I look, I've been married to a man from Mexico for over 20 years. And during that time, I've picked up a lot more than just family recipes. I'm almost fully bilingual now. I can read, write, and speak Spanish comfortably. The only times I really struggle are when people throw heavy slang at me or get super technical. But for everyday conversation, I'm perfectly fine. One morning, I was at the carniceria, the butcher shop, waiting in line. It's a small store, and they usually only have one checkout, so everyone knows the routine. You wait your turn, the server calls you up, and you place your order. On this day, I was next in line. As the woman in front of me was finishing her order, another older lady came up and started chatting with her. They were talking in Spanish about the meat, going back and forth about quality and prices. I didn't mind. I figured they knew each other, and it wasn't unusual for people to socialize while waiting. But as the first woman's order was wrapped up, the server glanced at the two of us and asked in Spanish, "Quién sigue? ¿Usted o ella?" Which means, "Who's next? You or her?" She was clearly referring to me as her, since I was the one who had been waiting. The second woman giggled and shrugged. "Oh, I don't know," she said, all coy. Then, without missing a beat, the server said, "Next." And instead of stepping aside, this woman darted in front of me and started rattling off her order like she had been there the whole time. For a moment, I just stood there, half annoyed and half amused. But then one of the other workers behind the counter caught my eye. They know me at that shop because I go there fairly often. He walked right up to me and said in Spanish, "What can I get you?" So there I was, ordering in Spanish like I always do, carrying on a full conversation with the butcher about cuts of meat and cooking. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the line cutter's reaction. She gasped, loud enough for me to hear, and her face turned bright red. Her eyes widened like she had just been caught doing something terrible. And honestly, in a way, she had. She assumed she could cut ahead because the white lady behind her wouldn't understand. Her expression was priceless. It was one of those moments you can't script. I just continued with my order, as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was smiling. When I finished, I grabbed my items and got in line at the checkout. Like I said, it's a small store, so there's just the one line. As fate would have it, the line cutter ended up right in front of me. She suddenly seemed extremely interested in the floor tiles. She didn't look up once. She didn't glance back. She didn't make a sound. It was as though she was praying for the earth to swallow her whole. She kept her gaze glued to her shoes until it was finally her turn. Years later, I still remember her face, and I still laugh about it. Living in Texas, it's not uncommon to run into Spanish speakers everywhere you go. My in-laws always switch to Spanish as soon as they step up to a register, and about 95% of the time, they get responses in Spanish right back. For the other 5%, I help translate. But that one day at the carniceria will forever stick with me. The moment someone's assumptions backfired spectacularly. That's where the story ends. What makes this story so fun is the way it all played out so naturally. The woman thought she could get away with being rude, only to be caught off guard when her assumptions turned out wrong. That little gasp and the sudden fascination with her shoes says everything. It's a reminder that embarrassment can hit harder than any confrontation. This next story is about a homeowner who lost patience after neighbors repeatedly backed vehicles into their yard and damaged the fence. The backyard used to be one of the quiet parts of the property. It was where the dog chased butterflies on late afternoons, where a few geraniums leaned against the fence, and where a couple of plastic lawn chairs got dragged out on warm nights. It was private and small, and it belonged to me. For a long while, it was just that. A simple patch of grass kept neat because it felt good to have a small, tidy corner of the world. Lately, though, it felt less like a yard and more like a shortcut people treated as a back alley. It started gradually. Little scuffs, faint scratches along the fence, a chip of paint knocked off at a corner. At first, it was easy to shrug it off. Things wear out, storms happen, people make mistakes. But as the months passed, the damage grew. The scuffs turned into smeared red streaks whenever the culprit drove a red car too close to my posts. The occasional scrape became dented boards, and then, recently, someone clipped the bottom rail so hard it splintered. Every time it happened, there was that same knot in the stomach. Another part of something cared for getting ruined. I tried being neighborly about it. When the red scuffs appeared the first few times, I mentioned it politely. "Hey, could you not back into my fence?" and kept the tone light. A few people nodded, and that was it. A couple of times I helped guide a trailer into the narrow driveway when someone looked unsure. I figured a little courtesy could go a long way. I've helped this neighbor before, after a storm, helped look for a missing rabbit, carried groceries when his kids' arms were overloaded. Those things matter, and I thought mutual respect was a two-way street. Tonight the pattern repeated itself and had gone far enough. I was letting the dog out like I always do, calling his name, watching him nose the ground, and I saw movement in the rear view of a car backing into the yard. My heart sank. The red scuffs had become reflex. This time I ran out of the garage and walked straight up to the driver's side window. The woman behind the wheel looked startled when the window came down. Maybe 20-something, eyebrows up, surprised at being interrupted that close to my fence. "Yes?" she said. I kept it short and practical. "What are you doing?" She answered the obvious. "Backing my car up." I asked then, calm but direct, "Is there a reason you're backing into my yard and not into the driveway 10 feet away? Are you the one who keeps hitting my fence?" She said no, like it was nothing. When I looked and saw the bumper barely an inch from the wood, it didn't feel like denial, but brazen indifference. "Bullshit," I said. "You're barely missing it now. Use the driveway." She shrugged. "Well, my boyfriend said I can back into this yard." That was the moment where patience ended. Mistakes happen. Being told a property is open for damage because someone said so is a different thing. "This isn't his yard," I told her. "That's not his driveway. It belongs to me. You will back up in my driveway and quit hitting my fence, or I'll look into ways to make sure you pay for the damage." Instead of backing up or apologizing, she put the car into drive, spun the tires, and tore up the soil. 2 deep ruts clawed through the grass where the wheels had burned rubber. Dirt flew. The smell of burnt rubber and the sight of torn earth felt like an affront. I stomped down the alley to the front door and knocked. Her boyfriend answered, looking sleepy and annoyed. I told him, calm at first, then firmer, to keep his friends and girlfriends out of my yard and stop allowing people to damage the fence, or I would make sure they paid to replace it. He laughed that little dismissive laugh that says he wasn't taking me seriously. That laugh was enough. I turned and walked away, put my dogs inside, and closed the door. The adrenaline made every hum and scent sharper for a few minutes after. Anger in situations like this simmers until something snaps. Then everything feels heightened. Every creak of a fence board, every scent of gasoline. I replay the times I've been neighborly, helping move a storm-fallen tree from the street, looking for a missing rabbit that didn't make it, carrying groceries. It stung to feel taken advantage of. What happened next was practical. Photos were taken, close-ups of scuffs, wide shots of ruts, timestamps, and the splintered board. The next morning there was a handwritten note tucked under the windshield wiper of the red car. "Stop backing into my yard. Reimburse for damages or contact me to arrange payment." Calling the police for trespassing and property damage felt like a last resort. Those routes are slow and bring paperwork and tension with neighbors one still sees in the mailbox line. So documentation and a firm request for repair felt like the reasonable first step. There's a breaking point where repeated boundary crossing stops being tolerable. Some people respect property, some don't, and some drift depending on who's watching. Neighbors should understand that a property line matters. It's where civility begins. That night, after the dog curled up and the house settled, the yard looked bruised but still mine. The fence still stood. There was a quiet satisfaction in having drawn a line and made it clear that disrespect would be met with consequence. That's where the story ends. Repeated small invasions build until standing up becomes necessary. The dismissive laugh from the boyfriend crystallized the problem from a minor annoyance into actionable disrespect. Documenting the damage, leaving a clear request for reimbursement, and avoiding an immediate police escalation keeps the response measured and defensible. Setting a firm boundary protects both property and peace of mind. This next story is about a mom who refused to cut her daughter's birthday trip short after one guest complained and demanded to go home. For as long as I can remember, trips into New York City have been a regular part of life with my daughter. We live about an hour outside of the city, and since she was little, we've gone in most weekends. Over time, it became a routine. Hop on the train, walk a lot, see sights, and enjoy being in the city. As she grew older, she started bringing friends along. They always knew the drill. Pack a small bag for the train, carry your own stuff, prepare for long walks, and expect the phone signal to drop in places. By now, it's second nature for the kids who usually come with us. They bring cards, sketchbooks, or little games for the ride, and they're ready to walk for 40 minutes or more without complaint. They've learned that the trip is more about exploring together than about convenience. Phones are fine, but the idea is to actually engage with each other. Parents always get a full rundown from me ahead of time. When my daughter turned 12, she asked to celebrate by inviting 3 friends into the city. My mom pitched in for tickets and came with us, which made it feel extra special. 2 of her friends had been on these trips before and knew exactly what to expect. The third, a new friend named Leah, had never been. I called Leah's mom personally, explained all the rules, made sure she knew how much walking was involved, and even suggested Leah bring something to do on the train. Leah's mom sounded excited and said it all sounded fine. The trip started off with a red flag. On the train, Leah had only her phone. When the signal dropped, as it always does, she instantly got frustrated. Instead of chatting, playing games, or looking out the window like the others, she just sat there complaining. When we arrived, things didn't improve. The first thing Leah asked for was a cab. My daughter gently reminded her that we always walk, but Leah rolled her eyes and groaned. As we browsed shops, she kept up the complaints. Why can't we just take a cab? Why do we have to walk so much? I tried to keep my patience. I offered water breaks, snack stops, and even suggested the subway, thinking maybe she'd like the novelty. The moment she heard what it was, she shook her head and said no. By the time dinner rolled around, she was sulking. We picked a place with food that worked for everyone, but Leah pushed her plate around and mumbled about wanting to go home. I pulled her aside quietly to ask if she was sick or if something was wrong. She shook her head and said she was just bored. That was it. Bored. I explained that we'd be there a few more hours because my daughter had chosen a show to see, but if she truly wanted to leave, she could call her parents. Leah dialed her mom, who asked me to bring her back. The problem was that would have meant either me or my mom leaving with Leah, taking a train back, and missing the show entirely. My daughter wanted both of us there for her birthday. It wasn't just about the show, but about us being together for her special day. I told Leah's mom we wouldn't be able to leave early, and that Leah could be picked up instead. Her mom wasn't thrilled about that answer. She didn't want to drive and didn't want to buy a train ticket, but eventually Leah's dad came to get her before the show started. Leah stayed crabby during dinner until she left. After the trip, word got back to me that Leah's mom was upset. She complained to the other moms about how I handled it, saying I should have taken Leah home myself. But both of the other moms immediately defended me. They said they wouldn't expect me to cut a birthday trip short unless their child was sick or injured, and they thought Leah's mom was being unreasonable. Now, Leah isn't allowed to hang out with my daughter anymore, and while my daughter was a little sad at first, she understood. I've been going back and forth in my mind, wondering if I should have just sucked it up and taken her home. But deep down, I still don't think it was fair to ask that of me, especially on my daughter's birthday. That's the end of this story. This one shows how mismatched expectations can ruin an experience. The mom went out of her way to explain the rules ahead of time, but Leah clearly wasn't prepared for the trip. The moment her dad came to pick her up, the tension lifted, which says a lot about how much of the issue was just attitude. The bigger picture is that it wasn't fair to expect a parent to derail their child's birthday celebration just to appease another family's kid. This next story is about an employee who had enough after their manager humiliated them in front of the entire team for supposedly not looking busy enough. Some mornings at work already feel heavy before they even start. The inbox sits waiting like a storm cloud. Slack pings are stacked one on top of another, and you know you're about to spend the day just trying to dig out of the avalanche. That's how things had been for me for weeks. I was already stretched too thin, but today was the day it broke me. We were in the middle of our regular team meeting when my manager suddenly turned the spotlight on me. In front of everyone, she said I didn't look as busy as the others. It wasn't even framed as feedback. It was just thrown out like an accusation. For a moment, I sat there frozen, staring at my screen, feeling every single coworker's eyes flick toward me. My stomach twisted. The thing is, I wanted to argue. I wanted to push back and explain, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm. Outwardly, I probably looked like I was just nodding along. Inside, though, I felt humiliated. My face was burning. The reality behind her words couldn't have been further from the truth. My inbox was a chaotic mess that never seemed to shrink. New tasks popped up before I finished the last batch. Deadlines kept stacking, and I was already surviving on late nights just to keep afloat. My phone stayed logged into Slack 24/7, buzzing at midnight, at 1 a.m., at 2 in the morning. Every time I heard the ping, I responded. No one else was doing that, but somehow I didn't look busy. The reason I didn't speak up much in meetings was because I was actually working. While some of my coworkers filled the airtime with long-winded updates, I was knocking things off the list, making sure deliverables got finished. For me, the focus was on results. For her, apparently, the focus was on optics. That was the trap. If I looked stressed, I was disorganized. If I looked calm, I was lazy. No matter how much effort I put in, it never fit the image she wanted to see. To survive, I'd been quietly hacking my own workflow. I used every tool I could get my hands on. Gemini, Copilot, Writesonic, Workbeaver. I didn't just use them for fun. They were the only way to keep from drowning. They helped me execute tasks faster, organize workflows, and keep some kind of rhythm. I even went so far as to try hiring a virtual assistant out of my own pocket. That plan didn't pan out, but it shows just how desperate I was to manage the mountain of work on my plate. The truth is, I was doing more than most people on the team. I was finishing my work and then some. But because I didn't constantly talk about it or dramatize the process, I got painted as someone slacking. Sitting there in that meeting, being called out as if I wasn't carrying my weight, I felt the unfairness press down hard. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my screen. The humiliation was still fresh, but underneath it was something else. Clarity. I realized I didn't need to keep doing this. Why should I keep proving myself to people who couldn't even see the effort I was pouring in? If all that mattered was looking busy, then the substance of what I delivered would never be enough. So I made a choice. I put in my notice. No arguing, no angry outburst, no dramatic confrontation, just a clear decision that I was done. I would finish my responsibilities, hand things off properly, and step away. And honestly, the moment I hit send on that resignation email, the weight lifted. Relief washed over me in a way I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't defeat, it was freedom. The best part was that I already had another opportunity lined up. A new job, one with a 30% higher pay rate, and a healthier environment waiting for me. It felt like the universe was giving me a mic drop moment. All the hours I'd spent proving myself in silence, all the nights answering messages in the dark, all the effort that had gone unseen, none of it mattered anymore, because I was walking away into something better. It felt good, more than good. It felt right. That's where the story ends. What stands out most here is how the focus was on appearances rather than actual results. The manager wanted people who looked busy, even if the work wasn't getting done, while the real effort was invisible. That mismatch makes it clear why quitting was the only way forward. Walking away became less about giving up and more about refusing to keep proving value to people who never intended to see it. This next story is about a young woman who felt deeply violated after her mom and sister entered her apartment without permission and completely reorganized her space. Growing up, home never really felt like mine. My mom and my younger sister both have obsessive cleaning habits tied to their OCD, and it shaped everything about my childhood. No matter how hard I tried, whatever I cleaned was never good enough. I could put my clothes away, make my bed, and keep things neat, but if a sweater hung over the back of my chair or a few papers sat out on my desk, they would declare my room a disaster. They would sweep in and redo everything themselves, leaving me feeling like my own space never belonged to me. One of the worst moments happened a few years ago, when I went away for a week with a friend's family. My dad was replacing the floor in my sister's bedroom at the time, so there was a chance she might need to sleep in mine. I made sure everything was neat before I left, just in case. When I got back, I could barely recognize my room. She had stayed there for one night and used that as an excuse to completely change it. She rearranged the furniture, reorganized my closet and dresser, and threw out papers I needed for a university application. She even tossed photos off my walls because they weren't framed and sharpened all my pencils down to matching lengths. It felt invasive and controlling. When I told my mom, she blamed me for not leaving my room clean enough. My dad's advice was just to let them do what they wanted because it was easier than fighting. That pattern followed me for years. Even when I finally moved away for university, the fear of them criticizing my space stayed with me. I would mop the floor every day, even when they weren't visiting. because I was so conditioned to expect judgment. It took nearly 2 years for me to relax enough to live with a normal level of clutter. My roommates thought my room was spotless, while I thought it was messy. Fast forward to now, I'm 22, working full time, living independently in my own apartment. It's mine, and I worked hard to support myself and keep it that way. My mom and sister bought concert tickets in my city and planned to stay with me. I agreed, even though I worried about them being in my space. The plan was simple. They would arrive Friday evening, we'd go to dinner, shop Saturday morning, then head to the concert at night. I cleaned all week beforehand so they'd have no reason to complain. But things went wrong before I even got home from work. They arrived earlier than expected and somehow got into my apartment without telling me. I still don't know how they managed it. When I walked in after work, I froze. My apartment looked completely different. They had rearranged my living room and bedroom furniture, reorganized my cabinets, and even thrown away food, including leftovers from the night before that I'd been saving. I stood there on the verge of tears. When I asked what they had done, my mom launched into a 10-minute rant about how terrible I was at housekeeping. She called me a slob, despite the fact that I had just deep cleaned. I called my property manager in a panic, but he swore he hadn't let anyone in. Nobody else had a key, and my building requires a fob. That left only one conclusion. They either lied to gain entry or broke in. I was furious. I told them to leave and stay in a hotel. They refused, calling me immature and ridiculous. I warned them that if they didn't leave, I would call the police. They laughed it off, saying I'd feel better after a night's sleep. So I dialed 911 in front of them. Only then did they pack up and head to a hotel, still calling me childish as they walked out. Later that night, my dad called to berate me. He said I was ungrateful, that I should be happy they cleaned for me, and that I should be more understanding of their OCD. When I pointed out that they had invaded my home without permission, he accused me of lying about leaving it unlocked. The next morning, I still felt raw. I texted them to say I wasn't going shopping. My mom brushed it off and said they'd just bring their bags back after checkout. I told her no, they needed to extend their hotel stay. Instead, they came to my door and banged until noon. I didn't open it. She yelled through the door that I was acting like a little brat and that she raised me better. I refused to budge. When dinner time came, I told them to go without me. They did, but continued sending texts calling me immature and saying I ruined the weekend. Later that night, they tried buzzing my apartment from the lobby. I ignored it. Then the texts started coming in from extended family. My dad, aunts, uncles, even my grandmother. All of them called me ungrateful and dramatic. None of them seemed to understand how invasive it felt to come home and find my personal space rearranged without permission. It left me shaken. I cried in the shower that night, not just because of what happened, but because I felt utterly alone in defending my own boundaries. I keep wondering if I'm wrong for being upset, if I should have just been grateful like everyone says. But when I walk through my apartment now, with things still slightly out of place, I can't shake the feeling that they crossed a line. That's the end of this story. This one highlights how damaging it feels when boundaries aren't respected, especially in a home. The family thought they were helping, but what they really did was take away control over someone's safe space. The strong reaction makes sense, because it wasn't just about cleaning. It was about trust and autonomy. That kind of violation doesn't disappear with a quick apology. This next story is about a friendship clashing over boundaries when one person tries to turn their friend's apartment into a personal storage unit. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Kayla, and my friend Kate lives in a tiny studio apartment that's honestly pretty cramped. A couple of months ago, she asked if she could leave just 2 small boxes of her winter clothes at my place. Since I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with more space, I figured it wouldn't be a problem. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. But here's the thing. Those 2 small boxes didn't stay 2 small boxes. Slowly, they multiplied. First, it was a couple of bags. Then it was shoes. Then coats. Before I knew it, she had hauled over what looked like half her closet. Now there are 6 big bags and 2 full bins stacked in my spare room. And to give you an idea, I don't just have this extra room sitting empty. I actually use it. It's where I keep my desk and get most of my work and studying done. It's supposed to be a functional space for me. But now, every time I go in there, I feel like I'm trying to work in the middle of a cluttered storage unit. I've had to push her bags out of the way just to get to my chair, and sometimes I've had to reorganize her stuff just so I can move around. Eventually, I decided I couldn't just let it keep building up. I told Kate that she needed to either come and get her stuff, or if she really wanted to keep storing it at my place, then she'd need to help me out by pitching in some money. I asked for $30 a month. Honestly, that's way less than an actual storage unit would cost, and it wasn't really about the money anyway. It was more about setting some boundaries and recognizing that my apartment is still my home. Well, Kate did not take that well. She got mad at me and said I was being greedy. She told me that friends don't charge each other for favors. Then she said I was acting like a landlord in my own apartment, which honestly stung because it wasn't about squeezing money out of her. I just wanted my space back. From where I'm standing, it feels really inconsiderate. My home doesn't feel like my home anymore. I can't even have people over without explaining why one of my rooms looks like it belongs to somebody else. It's frustrating to feel like I'm living in the middle of someone else's closet when I already pay rent for my own place. I brought this up to some of our mutual friends, and the reactions have been split. A few of them agree with me. They said it's not unreasonable to set limits, especially when I was clear about how much space she was taking up. But others think I'm making too big of a deal out of it. They say I should just let her keep her stuff here because that's what friends do. But the truth is, it hasn't just been an easy favor. It's been stressful and overwhelming. And it feels like if I don't draw the line now, then it'll just keep snowballing until I'm basically running a free storage unit out of my apartment. So now I'm stuck wondering, am I wrong for refusing to let Kate keep turning my place into her second closet? That story ends there. I think a lot of people underestimate how personal someone's space really is until they cross that line. It doesn't even have to be about the money. Just the feeling of losing control of your own home is enough to wear you down. And it's interesting how different friends can see the exact same situation in totally opposite ways. This next story is about a woman who got dragged into drama after her best friend trashed her boyfriend in private messages, only for him to read everything and place the blame on her. So let me lay this one out. I'm 25 and my best friend is also 25. We've known each other since we were kids, back in 2006. We're super close. The kind of friends who laugh at everything together, hype each other up, and share pretty much everything. That said, when it comes to relationships, I usually try to stay out of her decision making. I've always believed people need to figure out love and dating for themselves, without friends telling them what to do. Now, my best friend has been dating this guy who's 30. They met last November, and to be honest, she wasn't serious about him at first. She even went back to her ex for a while before circling back to this guy. He seemed to like her way more than she liked him. Fast forward a few months, and she's moved into his big house, even though she's unemployed right now. He works, she stays home, and she takes care of the house. That's their arrangement. From the start, I noticed he was kind of jealous. If her phone buzzed, he'd want to know who it was. He didn't like when she texted me too much, so I made a point to stop messaging her in the evenings. I figured I'd respect their time together, but the jealousy didn't stop there. He'd listen to her phone calls, even with other women. He asked her whether she had ever cheated. They even shared their phone locations, and he once got mad because she spent too long at a tattoo shop. That's the kind of guy he is. Watchful, suspicious. Here's where it gets messy. My friend has this habit of venting to me about him. And not just venting. She straight up calls him names, makes fun of his looks, and jokes about all the little things that give her the ick. At first I tried to tell her she shouldn't talk like that about her own boyfriend, but she brushed it off and said she wasn't going to stop. She kept at it multiple times a week, and sometimes I just laugh along without really thinking. One time I told her we should stop texting after 4 in the afternoon so he wouldn't get annoyed. Her response was, "Are you crazy? I've known you since we were 6. I've only known him a couple of months. He's ugly, and he has to accept both of us." That's the kind of stuff she'd send. And of course, I'd sometimes laugh at her jokes, maybe throw in a small comment. I wasn't hating on him myself, but I was there in the conversation, which makes me guilty by association. Then the bomb dropped. She left her phone out one day, and he went through her messages. He read all of it. Every insult, every laugh, every sarcastic comment about his looks, even some personal stuff she told me about him. And let's just say, he did not take it well. According to my friend, he confronted her, saying he read a message where she called him ugly. He also accused me of saying things or laughing along. He even claimed she sent me too many pictures of his face just to make fun of him. She tried to cover it up by telling him we have a special kind of humor that he was taking out of context, but he was furious. She told me later that while he forgave her because he loves her, he didn't forgive me. He apparently said things like, "Why is she even texting? Doesn't she have her own life? She should find a man." Funny enough, a few months ago he was telling her that I was good looking. Now suddenly I'm the enemy. The worst part? I have to visit her house soon to help her with something, and she warned me that he might say something. She said she'll defend me, but honestly, I don't even want to be in that position. It's her relationship, not mine. Yet, somehow I'm caught in the middle of this toxic triangle. Since then, things between them have only gotten more strained. He's been picking at her more, being meaner, probably because of what he read. She's confessed to me that she feels trapped in the relationship. She even admitted she never truly loved him, but she moved in because she doesn't like being alone. She said he's basically a pit stop until she figures out her life. Meanwhile, she continues to bash him daily, call him names, and tell me embarrassing things about him. For me, it's exhausting. I don't even want her to come stay at my place anymore because I don't want to get pulled deeper into her drama. She doesn't really have anywhere else to go. She fights with her family and doesn't have other friends. But that doesn't make it my responsibility to be her escape. The truth is, I love her as a friend, but this whole thing has made me see her differently. She doesn't respect him, and she doesn't respect boundaries. And now I'm the one painted as a bad person because I laughed at jokes she started. Honestly, I don't owe this guy anything, but I hate that I got dragged into their messy relationship. Looking back, I should have shut down the conversations harder. But with her, telling her no just sparks an argument, and I didn't want to fight my best friend. So here I am, stuck in a situation I never wanted to be in, dealing with drama that was never mine in the first place. That's where the story ends. That's such a messy spot to be in. On one hand, you're just trying to be a supportive friend, but suddenly you're the villain in someone else's relationship. It's kind of wild how quick things can flip when private conversations get exposed. What stands out most is how easy it is to get pulled into drama that isn't even yours. Honestly, it makes me think about how important it is to keep a little distance when friends are spiraling about their partners. This next story is about a retail worker stuck in the wrong department at Walmart, dealing with an extremely rude customer who refused to listen and made things way harder than they needed to be. Back when I was working part-time at Walmart, I was stationed in the auto care center. I only worked weekends, usually 2 days a week, because I had a full-time job elsewhere and was just trying to knock out my student loans with some extra money. Honestly, that place was wild. Walmart customers were, let's just say they were in a league of their own. In fact, a lot of my funniest and most frustrating stories came from those weekends in auto care. By my second hour into almost every shift, I was already fed up with the liars, the complainers, and the people who thought yelling was the same thing as problem solving. But I kept showing up because the money helped, and the stories practically wrote themselves. One time around Thanksgiving, I volunteered to work the Wednesday before the holiday. Normally, I'd stick to weekends, but they were desperate for help and offered a little bonus for anyone who picked up extra shifts. Plus, I didn't have anything else planned that week. What I didn't realize was just how swamped we'd be. There was a massive sale on tires, so the auto care center was absolutely slammed. Phones were ringing nonstop, customers were lined up, and we were juggling way more than we could handle. So there I am, picking up calls, and I answer one with the usual, "Walmart Auto Care, how can I help you?" On the other end, a woman's voice snaps back immediately. She says, "Don't you dare transfer me or hang up on me. I've called 4 times already and keep getting transferred. I need to know if you have any frozen pie dough left." I literally froze for a second. Frozen pie dough. In the auto care center. I took a breath and explained as calmly as I could. "Ma'am, this is the auto care department. I'm on the complete other side of the store. I don't have access to that information." But before I could even finish, she cuts me off and starts yelling. "Look, you need to just go look or call someone. I don't have time for this nonsense." Except she didn't exactly use the word nonsense. She was calling me names, dropping insults, basically acting like it was my personal fault she couldn't find pie dough. At that point, I was already irritated from the chaos of the day, and she wasn't making it any easier. I just said, "Hold please," and tried transferring her call up front where someone in groceries could help her. The problem was, no one up front would pick up. The phone just sat there, ringing and ringing, until it started beeping back at me. My manager walked by and saw the phone still blinking. He asked me what was going on, so I explained that it was a lady asking about pie dough. I had tried to transfer her, but no one would pick up. He shrugged and told me, "Just pick it up again and tell her to call back. We can't do anything from here." I sighed, because I knew this was going to be fun. I was already annoyed, and this lady was already rude. So, instead of picking it up with my normal voice, I decided to drop into a fake, deeper voice, hoping she might not realize it was me again. I answered with a gruff, "How can I help you?" Right on cue, she launched into another tirade. "You people are pathetic. I've called, and all I need to know is if there's any pie dough left. You lazy workers can't do your job and check for me?" At that point, I was done. I had no patience left for her attitude. So, staying in my fake, deep voice, I said, "Maybe you need to bring yourself in here and find out for yourself. Happy Thanksgiving." And then I hung up the phone. The second I set the receiver down, I just stared at it for a moment, half in disbelief at myself, and half satisfied that I'd finally shut her down. My manager didn't say a word, and I went right back to dealing with the actual auto customers who needed tires changed and oil checks done. That entire evening, I couldn't stop thinking about how ridiculous it was. There we were, drowning in tire orders, trying to keep up with people wanting their cars serviced before traveling for Thanksgiving. And in the middle of all that chaos, some woman decided her frozen pie dough emergency was more important than all of it. That's the end of this story. It's kind of funny how small things like pie dough can turn into someone's breaking point. That customer clearly wasn't just frustrated with Walmart. She was probably stressed about the holiday, but she took it out on the wrong person. Honestly, it's wild how often workers in one department get dragged into completely unrelated stuff. Still, I can't lie. Picturing that moment of using the fake, deep voice and hanging up probably gave the storyteller a laugh they'll never forget. Sometimes retail is just survival with a sense of humor. This next story is about a high school student who keeps getting rare silver dollar coins from a school vending machine and can't figure out why it keeps happening. Alright, so let me just explain what's been going on, because it's been nagging at me, and I kind of need to get it off my chest. At my school, we have the usual vending machines. Chips, candy, drinks, the standard setup. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one strange detail that I've now experienced 3 different times. This particular machine keeps giving me silver dollars. The very first time it happened, I was just trying to grab a bag of chips. I had pulled together some loose change from my bag and even dug around in my locker for a couple extra coins. So, I probably put in a little more than I actually needed. Like vending machines usually do, it spit out the leftover change in the little metal tray. But when I reached down and scooped it up, I froze. I had a couple quarters sitting in my hand, and this big, completely brown coin that looked way too large to be a quarter. At first I had no clue what it was. I'd heard of a silver dollar before, but I'd never actually seen one in real life. I mean, I'm a teenager. I don't know much about old coins beyond the basics. Still, I shoved it into my locker and kind of forgot about it for a while. Later, when I told my mom about it, she explained that it really was a silver dollar and that I should hang on to it because they're rare. She was confused too, mostly about why it looked so brown and tarnished. But it was clearly legit, the Sacagawea coin from the early 2000s. So the next time I went to school, I made sure to grab it out of my locker and take it home for safekeeping. I thought maybe it was just some weird one-time fluke, but then it happened again. This time, I was short on money and had no choice but to hit the return button. The machine clinked and rattled, and when the coins dropped into the tray, I saw not 1 but 2 silver dollars sitting there. I just stared at them, half in disbelief, half in excitement. For a split second, I thought, okay, I'll hang on to these. But here's the thing. I was insanely thirsty at that moment, like parched to the point of bad decisions. So, instead of pocketing them, I put both silver dollars right back into the machine and used them to buy a drink. Looking back, I regret it, but at the time, thirst overruled logic. So now, I only have 1 silver dollar left from these mysterious encounters. And honestly, I don't think that's the last of them. Something about this machine feels like it's got a stash of old coins hidden inside, and every once in a while, it spits one out just for me. I even started wondering where they're coming from. Did someone at the school load the machine with silver dollars by accident? Is there some janitor or vendor who just tosses them in without realizing what they are? I've tried searching online to see if this is a normal thing, like if vending machines sometimes cycle out rare coins, but apparently it's not common at all. The rarity of silver dollars is exactly what makes this whole thing so bizarre. And now I'm torn. Part of me wants to keep this secret so the machine keeps blessing me with these random coins. Another part of me feels like I should tell someone, but then again, I've already told a couple teachers without even thinking. Mostly because I didn't want to seem selfish about it. So far, nobody's done anything about it, and I kind of hope it stays that way. For now, I still have the one coin sitting with me, tucked away where I know it's safe. It's weird, but it feels like this little mystery that only I get to experience. Every time I walk past that vending machine now, I can't help but wonder if it's going to surprise me again. That's where this story finishes. What I like about this one is how small and random it is, but it still sticks in your head. It's not some big dramatic event, just a vending machine spitting out rare coins, yet it feels like a personal little mystery. You can almost imagine being that student, checking the tray like it's a slot machine. And honestly, part of me hopes they never figure out why. It's funnier when it stays unexplained. This next story is about someone watching their mother slowly lose her hearing, and the emotional struggle of finding a way to bring sound back into her life. I never imagined I'd live through a time where my mom slipped into silence. At first it was little things, the kind of stuff you almost brush off. She'd laugh late in church, always a beat or two behind everyone else, because she only realized the joke when someone nudged her. The TV at home was always cranked up so loud that the neighbors would bang on the wall in frustration. But then it got worse. I'd walk into the house and hear the kettle screaming on the stove while she just sat there, completely unaware. Sometimes I'd shout her name from another room, over and over, and get no response. In those moments, my stomach would drop, and for a split second, I'd wonder if she was even alive. At family meals, she'd sit smiling politely, nodding along with conversations. But her eyes told the truth. She wasn't following a word. She wasn't part of it anymore. Watching her drift away from us, one sound at a time, broke me apart in ways I couldn't put into words. The part that tore me up the most came during church one Sunday. Mom tried to sing along to one of her favorite hymns. She had her eyes closed, her lips moving, but her voice was completely off the melody. I caught sight of tears slipping down her face, tears she thought nobody noticed. That's when I prayed, silently and desperately. Lord, don't let her live in this silence. Show me the way. Not even a week later, one of the women at church pulled me aside. She leaned close and whispered that her aunt had gone through something similar, and she mentioned something called Oracle hearing aids. I didn't run out to buy them right away. To be honest, I was skeptical. We had already spent money on miracle devices that did nothing but disappoint. But deep down, I was desperate. Even if there was only the smallest chance, I had to try. When Mom first put them in, it wasn't some magical moment where everything clicked into place. If anything, it was overwhelming. She said the sounds were too sharp, too loud, like the world was suddenly screaming at her after years of quiet. She grew frustrated, pulled them out more than once, and I started to wonder if I'd made yet another mistake. But over the next few days, something changed. Slowly, the sharpness softened. The world didn't feel like it was yelling anymore. It felt like it was welcoming her back. On the third night, something small but unforgettable happened. I whispered goodnight before switching off the light. To my surprise, she stiffened, eyes wide open, and whispered back, "I heard you." Just 2 words, but it felt like a miracle. That was the turning point. From then on, little moments became big victories. She could hear the birds singing in the morning again. She could catch the sound of hymn books rustling in church pews. She could hear my voice when I told her I loved her, soft and clear, without me having to raise it. It wasn't instant and it wasn't perfect, but slowly, silence gave way to sound. For me, Oracle wasn't just a piece of technology. It was an answer to a prayer, not a flashy lightning bolt kind of answer, but one that came gently, through people, through instruments, through a whisper she could finally hear again. That story wraps up here. This one hits different because it's not about drama or conflict. It's about those quiet, emotional moments you don't forget. It shows how something as small as hearing a whisper can feel bigger than anything else. I think we all have those moments where the world feels heavier than we can carry, and then something small shifts and gives us hope again. It makes you realize how much the little things actually mean. This next story is about someone who got mistaken for an employee at a grocery store, but instead of it being a hassle, it turned into a surprisingly wholesome encounter. So, let me set the scene. I had just finished up work and swung by my local grocery store to grab a few things for dinner. Now, my job is administrative work at an industrial facility, which means my uniform is kind of a mix. Up top, I wear a polo shirt, decent enough to pass in a meeting, but down below it's jeans and sturdy work boots, because I walk several miles a day on the job and need something built for comfort and endurance. It's this odd halfway point between business casual and ready to get things done. Anyway, I'm moving through the store at my usual fast pace when I turn a corner and notice this couple walking just ahead of me. They've got their arms linked, looking around like the place is a museum they've never been in before, laughing about little details and pointing things out. It honestly felt like watching two tourists on an adventure, except the destination was the deli section of a grocery store. Now, one of my favorite things to do in public is people watching. It's just this harmless little pastime where you get to enjoy the characters around you, and these two definitely caught my attention. I slowed down a little just to let them take the lead, soaking in their energy. They were clearly out of place, but in a really charming way. At one point, the woman turned around mid-stride and spotted me just a few steps behind them. I didn't have any groceries in my hands yet, and I was smiling without realizing it, just enjoying the moment. She locked eyes with me, and I gave her an even bigger grin in acknowledgement. That tiny cue was apparently all she needed, because she stopped and asked me the classic line, "Hi, do you work here?" I couldn't help but laugh, partly because the question itself was funny, and partly because it immediately made me think of all the online posts where people vent about that exact scenario. I spend way too much time on the internet, so of course my brain jumped straight to that connection. Without even thinking, I shot back, "Nope, but I could play a manager on TV. Where are you trying to go?" That line absolutely cracked them up. Their laughter was so genuine and infectious that I found myself laughing right along with them. It was this unspoken moment of strangers sharing humor, and honestly, it felt good to play into it. They told me they were trying to find the deli, and luckily, we were already heading in the right direction. I pointed straight ahead and used a few landmarks to guide them. "See that red sign? Just make a right at the sign and you'll be there." They thanked me in unison, all cheerful and appreciative, before marching off in the right direction with their newfound sense of purpose. I kept trailing a little behind, partly to make sure they didn't get turned around, and partly because, well, I was still enjoying watching their little journey unfold. When they passed the last wrong turn they could have possibly taken, I walked past them and tossed out, "Hey, are y'all following me?" My tone was light, half joking, and of course it set them off laughing all over again. I wished them well, and ducked into another aisle to grab what I actually came for. But even as I wandered off, I could hear them behind me, still replaying my line about being a TV manager. One of them said through laughter, "He said he could play one on TV. Did you hear that?" By the time I got home, I had my dinner fixings in hand. Dinner itself was fine, just decent. But honestly, that quick, silly encounter with those two strangers made it feel like the best meal I'd had in a while. Sometimes you run into people who just brighten your day for no reason other than being themselves. And moments like that remind me that, yeah, there are still plenty of good people out there. That's where the story ends. This one just leaves you smiling because it shows how even a random grocery store run can turn into a highlight of the day. It's not about anything big or dramatic, it's just strangers sharing a laugh and walking away happier. It makes you realize those little connections can feel just as good as a big win. Honestly, that's the kind of story you don't forget right away. This next story is about a hotel worker stuck juggling nonstop phone calls, dealing with clueless third-party reps, and entitled high-tier members who didn't understand even the basics of checking in. So this was my first shift back after a couple of days off, and I didn't realize how drained I still was until the phone started lighting up like fireworks. I had spent about 90% of those 2 days just sleeping, and apparently it still wasn't enough to prepare me for what was waiting. Normally, the calls at this property aren't too bad. In fact, in over 3 months, this was only the second time I've ever had to use both Hold 1 and Hold 2 at the same time. That's saying something. But sure enough, within the first stretch of my shift, I had 2 calls waiting, and both of them were already wearing me down. Hold 1 was a third-party rep calling on behalf of a guest who wanted to do a mobile check-in but couldn't figure out how. Hold 2 was a high-tier rewards member, or rather, the husband of one, trying to do a mobile check-in without actually using the app. In other words, both calls were people asking me to explain the most basic hotel processes as if they'd never traveled before. First, I picked up Hold 1. Thankfully, I already knew what I was walking into because I had seen my GM pull up the reservation earlier in the day. That saved me a little grief. The rep immediately launched in. The guest is trying to complete a pre-arrival check-in and is unable to do so. What does the guest need to do to complete this? I took a breath and explained. The guest is on a third-party reservation and they're not a member. Even if they were a member, they would still need to come to the desk to check in because we require a card swipe for incidentals. The rep paused, then asked, "What are incidentals? Is it a fee or something?" At that point, I fully understood why so many third-party guests are shocked when incidentals come up. I tried to keep my voice even. It's a security deposit, $20 per night. In my head, I wanted to scream. Almost every hotel in the US has incidentals. How do you not know this? But instead, I wrapped up the call politely, wishing the rep a good day and moving quickly to Hold 2 before I lost my patience completely. Now, Hold 2 was a different beast. The reservation was actually in the wife's name. She was the member, not the husband who had called. I confirmed the reservation and saw there was no mobile check-in completed. The husband wasted no time. "We're arriving in an hour and we want to go ahead and check in." I explained calmly, "If you had completed a mobile check-in, I could pre-make your keys. But since it's a points reservation, I'll still need you to come to the desk to swipe your card for incidentals." He didn't like that, not at all. "You can't just check us in, not even for a high-tier member. The card is already on file. Brand name has all my information. Can't you just use that?" I shook my head at the screen, though of course he couldn't see that. "No, sir. My system won't allow me to use the card on file for incidentals. It's brand name policy." That's when he launched into a tangent. For several minutes, he lectured me, basically saying, "This is ridiculous. We're not just nobodies off the street who don't know what we're doing." And in my head, I'm thinking, you are literally the second highest tier, and you don't even know how a points reservation works. How is this real life right now? But out loud, I kept it professional. "Sir, I apologize, but as I stated, it is policy." He huffed and said, "Well, can you at least go ahead and put a room aside with our preferences?" I had to stop myself from laughing. Did he really think we just let high-tier members wander in and hope for the best? "Sir, we already have a room blocked for you that follows your preferences," I said. Finally, he calmed down a little. "Well, that's at least something. We'll be there in an hour to work the rest out." Click. He hung up, and I just sat there staring at the phone, dreading the moment they'd actually walk through the door. Because if this was how the phone call went, I could already tell the in-person interaction was going to be a whole different kind of headache. That story wraps up here. Man, you can almost feel the exhaustion coming through this one. It's wild how often people expect hotel staff to bend rules that just can't be bent. What gets me is how the simplest policies, like swiping a card for incidentals, end up becoming these long debates. You can tell the storyteller kept it professional, but I bet their inner monologue was way more colorful. It's one of those stories that makes you shake your head and laugh after the fact, but only because you survived it. This next story is about a mix-up with food delivery that left one neighbor accidentally eating another neighbor's entire dinner. That evening started out so simple. My wife was out with her friends, and I figured I'd make it easy on myself and order pizza for me and my son. Now, Joey's picky when it comes to food. Plain pizza only, nothing fancy. So I told my wife just to pick something plain for him and something meatier for me. We had a 50% deal on Uber Eats, but since it was on her account, I gave her a quick call and she ordered it from wherever she was. About 25 minutes later, the doorbell rang. A big order came in. 1 large pepperoni pizza and 1 large margarita pizza. It was perfect. Exactly what Joey would eat and what I could happily tuck into. We sat down, turned on the Manchester United game, and just enjoyed it. The pizzas were delicious, maybe a little too much food, but that's hardly a complaint. By halftime, I was already feeling stuffed. After the game ended, I went to the bathroom. As I'm in there, I hear the doorbell again, and Joey answers it. When I came back out, there was another delivery sitting there. This time a large meat feast pizza and a cheesy garlic bread. I thought that was odd. 2 deliveries in one night? But it was busy Saturday night traffic. Phones constantly engaged at the restaurant, so I couldn't even get through to ask what was going on. I figured, alright, maybe there was a mix-up, but food's food, right? I just set it to the side and started a movie. Half an hour later, things went sideways. A car pulled up into our shared driveway. I could hear voices outside, heated, sharp. Then came the knock at the door. Standing there was my neighbor, who I barely knew, and right next to him was the delivery driver, both of them looking furious. That's when the truth came out. That first delivery we had tucked into so happily, it wasn't ours. It had been theirs all along. Their pizzas, their dinner, and the second order, the one sitting cold on top of the bin in our utility room, that one was actually ours. I don't think I've ever felt more embarrassed. My son and I had devoured their whole order without even realizing it. The neighbor was understandably upset. It was after 9 o'clock by then, and they still had no dinner. I tried to explain. I tried to say it was an honest mistake, but the look on their face said they weren't buying it. I called the Uber and they said they'd sort it out, but the damage was already done. The neighbor wasn't impressed, and I just stood there feeling like the guiltiest pizza thief in history. That story wraps up here. It's kind of funny how quickly something innocent can spiral into pure awkwardness. Like, one minute you're just enjoying a game and pizza with your kid, and the next you're basically the villain in your neighbor's dinner story. What sticks with me is how small mistakes hit way harder when it's late. Everyone's hungry, and patience is gone. Honestly, that must have been one of those moments where you just want the ground to swallow you up. This next story is about someone who went to the store for just a quick grocery run, but ended up being mistaken for an employee, and roped into helping shoppers all across the aisles. So last weekend, I decided to swing by the grocery store just to pick up 2 things. Milk and bread. That was it. Nothing fancy, nothing extra. I figured I'd be in and out in 5 minutes. I threw on a plain blue shirt, one of those basic ones you don't really think twice about. What I didn't realize at the time was that this shirt just happened to be the exact same shade as the uniforms the store employees wore. At first it didn't cross my mind at all. I was just casually walking through, heading toward the cereal section, because I wanted to check something real quick. That's when an older lady gently tapped me on the shoulder. She smiled politely and asked if I knew where she could find a certain brand of tea. I chuckled and told her, "Oh, I don't actually work here, but I'm pretty sure it's just 2 aisles over." She seemed grateful, and instead of just heading off, she walked along with me like I actually was supposed to lead her there. I didn't mind though. It felt harmless enough, but that's when things really started to snowball. While I was pointing her in the right direction, another shopper nearby overheard us. This guy turned to me and asked where he could find peanut butter. Before I could even process what was happening, I was giving him directions too. And then, as if the universe was in on the joke, another person chimed in asking about avocados. At this point, it felt like the entire aisle thought I was on the clock. I was answering questions left and right, pointing people to produce, snacks, and spreads like I'd been working there for years. The funny part was, I actually shop at this store a lot, so I kind of did know where things were. It wasn't like I had to fake it. I was basically the unofficial tour guide of the grocery store that day. It turned into this strange little chain reaction. Every time someone saw me helping one person, another person would come over and ask something else. Pretty soon, I was half expecting somebody to hand me a price scanner or ask me to check the stockroom. The best moment came right as I was about to leave. I had finally made it over to grab the milk and bread I came for in the first place. I was heading toward the checkout lanes when a manager I had never even seen before walked past me. Without hesitation, he patted me on the back and said, "Thanks for helping out today. Really appreciate it." I didn't even correct him. I just gave a little nod like I'd just finished a long shift, grabbed my groceries, and walked out the door. All I could do was laugh at how I went in for 2 things, and somehow ended up volunteering as a grocery store employee for half the aisle. That's the end of the story. I love how this one spiraled from such a tiny misunderstanding. It's funny how wearing the wrong colored shirt can suddenly turn into being everyone's go-to person. Honestly, it sounds like the kind of accidental adventure that makes a boring grocery trip way more memorable. And the part about the manager thanking them is just the perfect cherry on top. This next story is about a grocery store standoff where a pushy customer kept trying to cut the line, only to end up outplayed in the pettiest way possible. A few years ago, I was at the grocery store waiting in line at the deli counter. My mission was simple: grab some potato wedges for my wife and head home. The line wasn't even that long. I was fourth or fifth in line, just hanging out at the end, when this woman walked up with what I assumed was her daughter or granddaughter. I'll just call her some lady. From the moment she arrived, she made it her personal goal to skip the line. Every time someone stepped up to order, she tried to sneak in ahead of them. The deli worker, who clearly had the patience of a saint, kept politely telling her she needed to wait her turn. Each time, her frustration grew. She kept huffing, rolling her eyes, and muttering under her breath about how she just wanted some wedges. As I got closer to the front, she was practically vibrating with impatience. The guy in front of me ordered, and I heard her tell her daughter or granddaughter, "This is ridiculous, I just want some wedges." By then, I already knew exactly how I was going to handle it. Finally, it was my turn. That's when she tried to cut in front of me again. This time, I spoke up. Calmly, I told her the end of the line was behind me. She didn't like that one bit. She snapped, "This is nonsense. It's first come, first serve." The deli worker and I just stood there in silence, staring at her, until she finally stomped back to hover off to the side. When I looked at the hot food case, I noticed there weren't many wedges left, not nearly enough to satisfy 2 customers. So I asked the worker for more than what was available. He said they'd need to drop a fresh batch, which would take a few minutes. I told him no problem, I'd wait. At that point, I suggested he could help her since I was waiting anyway. She stepped up, irritated but resigned, and told him fine. She'd wait too. It was like she couldn't let it go, but she had no choice. A little while later, closer to 10 minutes than 5, the new batch of wedges came out. She immediately made a move like she was going to swoop in ahead of me, but I reminded her again that I was next. The deli worker nodded and asked me how much I wanted. I leaned in just slightly and said, "I'll take all of them." He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "All of them?" I kept my face straight and said, "All of them." That's when he cracked the faintest smile. He scooped every single wedge into a container and handed it over. $14 for the whole lot. Worth every penny. I walked away slowly, just to catch the aftermath. Behind me, I heard her voice rise into a shriek. "He did what?" The way she whipped her head around, you'd think I'd just stolen her life savings instead of some fried potatoes. I didn't even look back, just carried my haul to the register. Later that night, while retelling the story to my wife, I realized the only thing that would have made it better was locking eyes with her and eating one wedge right there on the spot. Best $14 I've ever spent. That's where the story ends. What makes this one so good is how simple it is. Just potato wedges, nothing life-changing, yet the drama played out like a soap opera. The best part is that moment of silence between the customer and the worker, like they both knew she had it coming. Sometimes the smallest acts of pettiness end up feeling like a cinematic masterpiece. This next story is about a fast food worker who got tired of being micromanaged and found the perfect petty way to get back at their boss. Back when I worked at McDonald's, there was this one shift leader who made every single day feel like a nightmare. I'll call her Linda. Not her real name, but it fits the way she acted. Linda had this talent for taking a normal shift and turning it into absolute chaos. She was constantly yelling and barking orders, no matter how small or unimportant the task was. If you so much as breathed wrong in her presence, she'd find a way to chew you out. The worst part was how she micromanaged everything. If I folded a wrapper slightly off center, she'd notice. If fries came out 30 seconds late, she'd lose her mind. She never let up. And it wasn't just me. She treated the entire crew the same way. Everyone walked on eggshells when she was around. One day, I was working a kitchen shift with her, already dreading the hours ahead. I overheard her mocking my work bestie, literally repeating what they had said, but in a sing-song, condescending voice. That was the breaking point for me. I'd had enough of her attitude. Now here's where things got interesting. While Linda was running around barking at people, I noticed she accidentally made an extra double cheeseburger. No pickles. It was obvious what she was doing. We weren't allowed to prep our break food ahead of time, but she had thrown a generic alteration sticker on it like it was a mistake. planning to save it for herself later. The problem for her was that I knew the rules just as well as she did. So I looked at the burger sitting there, sitting longer than anything should have at McDonald's. I looked at my work bestie and gave a little smile. Then I said, loud enough to sound casual but clear enough to send a message, this has been sitting here for a while. I don't even know what this sticker's for. You think we should toss it? My bestie caught on right away and nodded. Without hesitation, I picked up that double cheeseburger, walked it right over to the trash, and tossed it. Gone. A few minutes later, the explosion came. Linda stormed into the kitchen, absolutely fuming. "Who threw away the double cheeseburger?" She screamed like someone had just set the building on fire. I didn't even flinch. I turned to her calmly and said, "That was me." It had been sitting there too long, and the sticker didn't mean anything. I didn't want it going out by mistake. She glared at me, eyes burning with anger. But here's the thing. She couldn't punish me. I had followed policy to the letter. Food can't sit past a certain time, and stickers without clear labeling don't count for anything. Technically, I had done exactly what I was supposed to do. She stood there for a moment, fuming but powerless, before stomping back to make herself another burger for her break. The kitchen felt lighter after that. Everyone knew what had happened, and even though nobody said it out loud, I could feel the silent high fives coming my way. It was such a small thing, just one cheeseburger, but it felt like the first real win against her constant micromanaging. Looking back, it still makes me smile. That's the end of this story. Moments like that stick because they flip the power dynamic for just a second. Linda thought she had everyone under her thumb, and then her little secret burger stash got tossed out right under her nose. It's funny how something as small as a cheeseburger can feel like a major victory when the tension's been building for so long. And honestly, the quiet teamwork between the storyteller and their bestie makes it even better. This next story is about a parent who kept a hilarious list of all the quirky and ridiculous things her husband said to their baby. When my kid was just a baby, I started this little habit that turned into one of my favorite things. I kept a running list on my phone of all the random, funny, and downright strange things my husband would say to him. At first, it was just a couple of lines I wanted to remember, but over time, it grew into this big collection of quotes that really showed his personality as a dad. One of the earliest ones I wrote down was, "Compared to you, all other babies are garbage." He said it in this completely serious tone, like he was making a scientific observation, and I had to hold back my laughter. Another day, while bouncing the baby in his arms, he looked at him and said, "We make a great team. We should go on adventures together and solve mysteries. Make a weird noise if you agree." The baby cooed right on cue, and it was one of those moments that made me realize how funny he was, even in the middle of everyday parenting. There were times when the things he said didn't even make sense, but they were hilarious in their own way. He'd greet our son with, "Hello, the baby." Baby, like he was announcing royalty or writing a book title. Or when the baby would gnaw on his fingers, he'd say, "Pacifiers have ceased to satisfy you. You crave human flesh." Somehow he could make even teething sound dramatic. He had this way of turning tiny, ordinary moments into these over-the-top declarations. Like after the baby let out a big fart, he'd clap his hands and proudly announce, "My child is an honor student in the School of Farts." Or when the baby was fussing, he'd point at the mirror and say, "None of that now. Look in the mirror. You're disappointing the mirror, baby." One day, when the baby started moving around in these awkward pre-crawling motions, my husband leaned down and said, "Those are some sweet parkour moves, bro. That one's called humping the dumpty." I couldn't stop laughing, even though I knew our son had no idea what was going on. It wasn't always silly. Sometimes it was just the way he saw the world through the lens of fatherhood. Like when he whispered, "Such a good baby to hold." Like, "This is what my arms are for." Or when the baby fell and cried, and he said, "That didn't hurt. It was just really dumb and embarrassing. You're right to cry. That was humiliating. You're lucky no one was videoing because that would haunt you forever." The list kept growing. He'd call him pre-qualified for going to sleep. He'd push the stroller, get his toe run over, and groan, "I'm gonna sue you for emotional damages." That was my emotional support toe. When the baby cut a tooth, he grinned and said, "Congratulations, mazel tooth." And when diaper duty struck, he'd sigh and mutter, "What a day to have a nose." Even the little negotiations cracked me up. He'd ask, "What would you like to wear today?" Pause for silence. Jorts? You don't have jorts. Pick a different thing. Or while feeding him oatmeal, he'd throw in grown-up culture, it's considered better to not get oatmeal everywhere if you can avoid it. And sometimes, he really just leaned into the absurd. I'll trade you one of my boogers for one of yours. Or, I'm going to give you another cookie because it's easier than fighting with you. But later in your life, I need you to tell people I was a good parent. Actually, no. I don't care what they think. Tell them whatever you want. Looking back on that list now, I realize it wasn't just about the jokes. It was about capturing the way he connected with our baby, turning every ordinary moment into something funny, playful, or strangely profound. It's one of those things I'll treasure forever, because it's not just about the words. It's about the way he made being a dad his own, and how much love and humor he poured into it. That's the end of this story. I love how these little quotes paint such a full picture of a dad's personality. It's not polished or perfect, it's just raw and funny in the moment. Stuff like that ends up being more memorable than any big gesture. Honestly, it shows how much joy there is in the small things that might seem ordinary at the time. This next story is about an employee who had to deal with a disruptive stepdad trying to drag them into messy family drama at work. It had been one of those really quiet days at work, the kind where nothing much happens and you almost start to relax too much. I figured it was the perfect time to sneak off to the bathroom, and of course, that's when someone showed up needing something. Our bathroom light and fan switch on together, and the fan is so old and rattly that it practically drowns out everything else. Even so, I could hear the faint sound of someone entering the lobby, followed by loud shouts asking for an employee. Then came the pounding. This guy started knocking hard on the staff-only door that leads back to the desk area. The whole time there's a big sign sitting out front that clearly says, "Staff will be back shortly." Still, he just ignored it. I didn't rush myself, but I did finish up and head out. As soon as I stepped out of the bathroom, he shouted again, "Hello, is anyone there?" I called back that I'd be right with him while I washed my hands, but by then I was already annoyed. When I finally walked up to the desk, I decided to make a point. I picked up the "Staff will be back shortly" sign and held it right in front of him, as if to say, "Look, this was right here the whole time." He didn't seem fazed. Instead, he jumped straight into his business, saying he needed to drop some stuff off for a guy named Raphael. He listed out the items and then asked me for Raphael's room number. I told him I couldn't give that out and suggested he just contact Raphael directly to arrange a handoff. That's when the man launched into this whole backstory I didn't ask for. Honestly, I wasn't listening too closely because I could already tell where it was headed. Something about being Raphael's stepdad, some kind of fight with the mom, and apparently Raphael wasn't welcome at the house anymore. In short, family drama I had zero interest in. I cut in politely and reminded him again. I couldn't give out a room number, nor could I even confirm if Raphael was staying there, but he wouldn't drop it. He circled back into his story again, clearly trying to wear me down. So I stopped him mid-sentence and said he could just leave the items with me at the desk. He seemed ready to dump them off anyway. Eventually, after one more half-hearted attempt to get the room number, he gave up and left the stuff with me before heading out. Once he was gone, I checked the system and confirmed Raphael was, in fact, a guest. I moved the belongings to our back room and was about to settle back at my desk when I suddenly heard shouting outside. Curious, I glanced at the security monitors, and there it was. The same man, chest to chest with a younger guy I assumed was Raphael. They were in the driveway, squaring up like they were about to fight. I watched as they got in each other's faces, backed off, and then circled back again. It was this weird push and pull standoff. At that point, I debated what to do. I didn't want a full-on fight breaking out in the parking lot, and I especially didn't want to get in the middle of it. This is the South, and practically everyone carries something on them. No way was I walking out there just to get dragged into their drama, or worse, risk getting hurt. When they started shoving, I made the call. I rang the police, hoping they'd arrive before things escalated into something serious. After I hung up with the dispatcher, I noticed the two guys suddenly calming down. For a second, it looked like they might actually get into the same car together, and I thought maybe it would all blow over. I was wrong. On the monitor, I saw the stepdad go to his car and grab something. I couldn't tell what it was. Maybe nothing, maybe a weapon, but either way, they were back to squaring up, and my nerves were on edge. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long. A police cruiser pulled up with its lights on just as fists started flying. The two men broke apart immediately. I couldn't see if the officer had drawn a weapon, but he didn't order anyone on the ground. So maybe there wasn't actually a weapon involved after all. Of course, me being nosy, I kept watching the feed. At first I thought the cops might just send the stepdad on his way with a warning, but it must have been worse than it looked from my angle. Or maybe Raphael pressed charges, because they ended up arresting the stepdad right there in the driveway. Once everything had settled, Raphael came inside and stopped by the desk. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was. He seemed soft-spoken, maybe even a little socially awkward, but definitely shaken up. I didn't press him for details. I'm not that nosy face-to-face. But he did mention that his stepdad had turned aggressive after he'd simply asked to be left alone. I really felt for the guy. He reminded me a lot of some of the quieter friends I used to hang out with when I was younger. Hopefully, he's got people in his life who will support him and help him move past what happened that day. That story wraps up here. Man, family drama spilling over into public like that is always rough to witness. I get why the employee didn't want to step in directly, because that could have gone south fast. The fact that it escalated all the way to an arrest kind of shows just how tense it really was. What sticks out most to me, though, is how calm and soft-spoken the son seemed afterward. It makes you wonder how often he's had to deal with situations like that. This next story is about someone who tried to do a good deed after donating blood, only to faint in the middle of a Burger King and cause a whole scene. Alright, so let me set the stage. I'm a 27-year-old woman, overall healthy, though I deal with some mental health stuff and a thyroid condition. But the thing that always stands out about me, I've got a weird love for salt. Like, ever since I was a kid, I'd literally pour salt into my palm and lick it. These days, I just drown my food in it, no shame. People stare at me sometimes, wide-eyed, like I'm breaking some law of nature. But honestly, doctors have always told me to eat more salt because my blood pressure is chronically low. To give you an idea, whenever I go for a checkup, my blood pressure is either right on the edge of normal or dipping into the too low zone. And even with my crazy salt intake, like whole bags of salt and vinegar chips, I still can't push it into the higher range. I've kind of accepted that it's just how my body is. So anyway, one morning I wake up, take my thyroid meds, have 2 cups of coffee, and a banana. Pretty standard. I've got a haircut appointment, which already makes me nervous since I couldn't even remember the last time I had one, probably before the pandemic. I end up getting off at the wrong bus stop, which is classic me, and by the time I get to the salon, the haircut itself is over in, I swear, like 2 minutes. The guy was lightning fast. It looks fine, and hey, he's got 20 plus years of experience. So maybe that's why it felt so quick. I pay a lot for it, shrug it off, and keep going about my day. Across the street though, I see a blood donation bank. And at that point, I knew what was coming. See, ever since I turned 18, I've tried to donate blood a few times a year. By now, I've attempted it at least 27 times, but only one donation had actually been successful. Usually my blood count is too low, and they send me away with advice like, eat more red meat and try again later. Still, I keep trying because I want to help however I can. So I fill out the forms. No tattoos, no trips to Congo, no risky stuff. They prick my finger, run the test, and surprise. My blood levels are good enough this time. I'm thrilled. They check my blood pressure, 90/70, which is just my normal, and tell me I'm fine to donate. 10 minutes later, I'm lying there with nearly half a liter of my blood flowing into a bag that rocks gently on a little machine like it's a baby in a cradle. When it's done, I take it slow, sit down, drink my soda, and honestly, I feel fine. I leave and walk about 15 minutes in nice weather, telling myself I deserve something salty and greasy to replenish my body. Perfect timing. There's a Burger King right on my path. As I'm about to go in, I notice a mom and her kid nearby. The boy, maybe 12 years old, drops a bag of marbles and they scatter everywhere. The mom's scolding him, but I crouch down to help him gather them up. The marbles are catching the sunlight, sparkling as they roll, so it's easy to find them. I scoop them up, hand them back, ruffle the boy's hair, and then head inside. And this is where my mistake hits me. The moment I step in, I realize something's wrong. My head feels fizzy. The light is too bright, and I'm cold sweating. I think, okay, no problem, just sit for a bit, let my body catch up. But it only gets worse. My vision's blurry, I can't hold my head up, and I know I'm about to go down. I try to get the attention of a worker behind the counter, and they bring me something, but the next thing I know, I'm opening my eyes on the floor of Burger King. Every employee and customer is standing over me, staring. I had fainted right there, in front of everyone. My first thought wasn't even about myself. It was about my phone and my bag. I'm broke, and not about to let my stuff get stolen. Once I make sure they're safe, I notice two women beside me. One's a worker, and the other says she's a doctor. And just like in the movies, she takes my hand, speaks gently, and checks on me. Honestly, I kind of liked how calm and kind she was. I explained that I donated blood earlier, that my blood pressure is always low, and that crouching to help the boy must have triggered it. I insist I'm fine, but before I know it, an ambulance has arrived. That's when I realized I must have been out for a while, because someone had called 112, and I hadn't even noticed. The EMTs are kind, though one of them is a bit skeptical, probably assuming I was on something. I don't blame her. People lie to them all the time. I tell them the truth. No smoking, no drinking, no drugs, nothing. They walk me to the ambulance, check my vitals, ask questions, and eventually confirm it's just a fainting spell from blood donation combined with crouching too much. They ask if I want to go to the hospital, and I firmly say no. Back inside Burger King, I order a brioche burger and a Coke Zero. The staff even bring it to me. My appetite isn't great, so I slowly eat fries one by one, head tilted to the side while sipping Coke. Little by little, I feel alive again. And the cherry on top? That kind doctor who held my hand had secretly paid for my meal. I tried to argue, but I was still fuzzy and weak, so I let it happen. After making sure I was steady, I thanked everyone, apologized for the chaos, and went to a nearby park to lay down. At the end of the day, I traded 480 milliliters of blood for free fries and a reminder that there are still good people out there. That's the end of this story. Man, fainting in a Burger King has gotta be one of the most random ways to become the center of attention. What stands out to me is how many people jumped in to help, like it turned into this mini-team effort to take care of a stranger. Even the part about the doctor paying for the meal feels kind of wholesome in a chaotic way. Sometimes people really do surprise you, and not always in a bad sense. Anyways, that's everything for today's batch of stories. Hopefully this was a chill listen, whether you followed along or just let it run while doing your own thing. But before you go, if you enjoyed this video, a quick like and subscribe really helps out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.